When Lu Zhu relayed this news to Jiang Ruan, she was laughing so hard she could barely stand up straight. This time the Xia family is indeed reaping what they have sown. Let's just let them fight with each other. Lian Xiao was also laughing as she remarked, "Isn't there a saying, what goes around comes around ***?" Because the families of the eldest and second sons of the Xia family have committed such disgraceful acts, they were bound to be exposed by someone one day. Tiandao Yu Luan Hui. This seems to be a version of the saying, Tiandao Yu Luan Hui Congtan Rao Guo Shu A. The gist of this seems to be that both good and bad deeds are remembered by heaven and rewarded accordingly. Just because there is no immediate consequence, it does not mean that heaven has not noticed. When reincarnation finally takes place, it will become clear that heaven has not allowed an evildoer to go unpunished, or failed to reward someone who has done good. Outside, the sky had turned dark. Baiji used a pair of scissors to trim the wick of the lantern, causing the light to shine more brightly, without flickering erratically. Baiji then draped a thin cloak over Jiang Ruan's shoulders, saying, "Miss, it's getting colder. Be careful not to fall ill." It was already early autumn. In the daytime there was no discernible difference, but at night the autumn chill could be felt. Jiang Ruan closed the book in her hand, and her gaze inadvertently fell on a whistle on the table. The whistle was so exquisitely made, and she could not help but reach out a hand to pick it up, cup it in her hands to examine it closely. This was the whistle that Xiao Xiao had given her in the prison that day. At that time, she had been unable to take the time to look at it carefully. Now, even while looking at it, she was unable to determine what it was made of, and it carried a very faint scent. On the body of the whistle was engraved a golden qilin striding through flames and wind. When Jiang Ruan leaned closer, she could discern a clean, clear scent. Xiao Xiao had been gone for more than 20 days. Something must have happened to him. Jiang Ruan put down the whistle and was just thinking about lying down when she saw Tianju, who had been sitting outside, abruptly shoot to her feet with an extremely grave expression. Jiang Ruan was slightly alarmed, but then in the warm yellow light of the gently swaying candle flame, a tall, slender figure slowly appeared. That person walked forward a few steps until he could be clearly seen, elegant and distant. Who else could it be but Xiao Xiao? Tianju called out in a low whisper, "Master." Her face was full of anxiety, which was uncommon for her. And it was only then that Jiang Ruan smelled the reek of blood coming from Xiao Xiao's body. Another look at Xiao Xiao revealed that even though his expression seemed as usual, his face was several degrees paler than it normally was, and his lips were verging on being colorless. "Are you hurt?" she asked with a frown. "I'm fine." Xiao Xiao pursed his lips as he said this, but hardly had the words been uttered before he collapsed, right on the soft couch of Jiang Ruan's outer chamber. Tianju dared not say anything else except to whisper anxiously, "Miss Master." Jiang Ruan stared at the unconscious figure on the couch for a moment before finally saying, "Close the door and windows, and ask Lian Xiao and Baiji to boil a pot of water and bring it here. Lu Zhu guard the door. Tianju, do you have any medical skills?" Tianju shook her head and replied, "This subordinate can only recognize a few poisons." Jiang Ruan felt a slight headache coming on. "Then what did you all do when you were injured in the past?" "Endure it," Tianju replied. "Endure it until we could return, and then a doctor would come and tend to us." It was not possible for assassins to worry about the condition of their injuries all the time. If they really valued their lives that much, then they were in the wrong line of work. Jiang Ruan looked down in thought, then said, "Put him on my bed. It is too easy to leave traces elsewhere." This. Tianju was somewhat amazed at this. To allow a man to lie on one's own bed. Wasn't this giving tacit approval? But on looking at Jiang Ruan, she did not seem to be especially close to Master. "Move quickly." Jiang Ruan did not give her time to ponder the matter. "If you don't get going, your master will bleed to death." Only then did Tianju restrain the conjecture in her heart, and moved Xiao Xiao to Jiang Ruan's bed. Outside, Lu Zhu stood at the courtyard gate, faithfully keeping guard so as to avoid unexpected incidents. However, her mind was constantly thinking about what might be happening within, and she kept urging Jean Eyre, who was perched on the rooftop, to look in. What on earth is happening? Jean Eyre leisurely sat on the roof. He prized up a roof tile to look in, and clicked his tongue before saying, "Nothing much, just that your young miss has carried Master to her bed." Ah, Lu Zhu covered her mouth. How could Miss allow a man to lie on her own bed so casually? In my opinion, your Miss is making use of this opportunity when my master is unconscious to behave indecently towards him. Jane Eyre continued clearly and logically. It is a moonless night, and the wind is high, indeed the perfect occasion. See, she's even let the curtains down. Isn't this? Shut up. His increasingly outrageous words were the last straw for Lu Zhu, who burst out, You dung to Z with your mouthful of bullsh *t. Don't you dare sully the innocence of my Miss. What's so amazing about your young master? My Miss is naturally beautiful and intelligent, so why would she have any need to do something like this? On the contrary, it is your young master who came to my Miss's residence, without rhyme or reason, to faint instead of going somewhere else. What kind of evil intentions does he have? Lu Zhu stunned Jane Eyre into silence with her gift of offhand ramblings, but the reason for this was something which could not be talked about with outsiders. He was momentarily unable to come up with an acceptable justification for his master's actions. Meanwhile, Jean San, who was sitting in a tree watching the show, huffed in laughter. She thought that Jane Eyre and Lu Zhu were a couple of buffoons who were made for each other, and it was great fun watching the two clowns interact for her entertainment every day. Within the room, Tianzhu had examined Xiao Xiao and found that the source of his injury was a wound that had been poisoned. However, Xiao Xiao himself had medical knowledge, so he had taken the antidote and was feeling better at present. The wound still had to be seen to, though. Following the method used by Tianzhu and her comrades, Zhang Ruan had to carefully remove the cloth to expose the wound before rebandaging it to stop the bleeding. Although this was convenient for a short period, after some time the wound would be prone to putrefaction. Seeing as Tianzhu was unreliable, Zhang Ruan undertook to tend to the wound herself. After Tianzhu had lifted Xiao Xiao onto the bed, Zhang Ruan sat by it. No blood could be seen on Xiao Xiao's black clothes, but a large glistening patch was revealed in the light of the lamp, but she could not tell if it was blood or sweat. Zhang Ruan touched the patch, and when she brought her hand away, it was shockingly stained with blood. Lian Xiao, who had brought over the basin of hot water, gasped and said in a slightly panicked voice, Miss Xiao Wangye is seriously injured. Zhang Ruan looked at the face of the young man on the bed. Even though he was injured, his expression remained as cold and detached as ever, as if this was not a situation of any import. As his eyes were closed, his long eyelashes drooped down, casting deep shadows under his eyes in the lamplight. His face was pale and his lips white, and his entire being seemed to be carved out of jade, giving him an aura of coldness and purity. It was only his thin lips, tightly pursed, which indicated the discomfort he was in. Zhang Ruan accepted a clean handkerchief from Bai Ji and soaked it in the hot water. Then, she took up a pair of scissors which had been doused in hot wine. She held on to Xiao Xiao's collar with one hand and wielded the scissors in the other, carefully cutting through the cloth along the patch where the blood had appeared. Although her movements were steady, she still held her breath and concentrated fully. Upon observing this, Tianzhu's expression shifted minutely. Zhang Ruan cut open the clothes with difficulty, then pulled the cloth aside to lay bare Xiao Xiao's chest. When Bai Ji and Lian Xiao saw this, they flushed a deep red. Although they knew that their young miss would not be bashful in such a circumstance, and had never really cared about how sensitive young ladies were supposed to behave, Zhang Ruan's blatantly opening an unfamiliar man's clothes gave them a shock. Whatever the case, Zhang Ruan was still an unmarried girl, and for her to gaze upon a male body in this situation, Bai Ji and Lian Xiao truly did not know whether to laugh or to cry. However, upon looking at Zhang Ruan's disinterested expression, there seemed to be no sign of her being stirred up by the current context. But the young lady with the scissors in her hand was not as calm as the two maidservants imagined. Her general impression of Xiao Xiao was that he was thin, but when she pulled open his clothes, she discovered that he was quite lean, with well-defined muscles, giving the impression of a kind of wild, unrestrained strength. And on closer inspection, his jade-like skin was actually littered with many small scars, both old and new. He really is a killer, Zhang Ruan thought. Suddenly, she heard Lian Xiao coughing uncontrollably beside her, and looked up to meet Xiao Xiao's thoughtful gaze. She had no idea when he had regained consciousness, and there she was holding a pair of scissors and staring at his body dazedly, looking for all the world like a pervert. Zhang Ruan glared at Xiao Xiao and asked, How did this happen? I encountered an ambush on the way back to the capital, Xiao Xiao replied. The eyes looking at Zhang Ruan were relatively gentle. Zhang Ruan paused, retrieved the handkerchief from the basin of hot water, wrung it out, and carefully helped Xiao Xiao to wipe the blood away from the wound. At this point, it could be clearly seen that a triangular blade was embedded in Xiao Xiao's chest. The tip of the blade had penetrated deeply, rendering it very difficult to deal with. In her previous life while in the palace, Zhang Ruan had been constantly bullied, so she was very familiar with basic wound dressing, but she could not manage a wound like this. Xiao Xiao, who had read the expression in her eyes, said, "Let me do it." He stretched out his hand intending to pull out the blade, but Zhang Ruan said, "No one will stop you if you want to die, but don't die in my room." Xiao Xiao was startled. Zhang Ruan batted away his hand and carefully cleaned the blood away from around the wound once again. Xiao Xiao's nonchalant attitude horrified her. Even if a killer considered his life to be worth nothing, this was truly too casual. Zhang Ruan looked for a while, found a good angle, then took hold of the weapon that was sticking out of Xiao Xiao's body. After a split second of hesitation, she exerted a steady force and pulled the blade out. Xiao Xiao stifled a groan. Zhang Ruan hurriedly pressed the handkerchief to the wound, and it was soaked in blood immediately. She wrung it out and repeated the action. Baiji had to change the water in the basin twice. The wound was triangular and consequently impossible to bandage directly. After some thought, Zhang Ruan asked Lian Xiao to bring her needle and thread. Lian Xiao brought her the requested items and asked, "Miss, are you thinking of stitching up Xiao Wangya's wound?" "Stitching it up is the only way." Zhang Ruan looked at Xiao Xiao and asked, "Are you afraid of pain?" Xiao Xiao started minutely before shaking his head. "Even if it's painful, endure it." Zhang Ruan took up the silver needle and passed it through the candle flame, then picked up a clean silk thread. Even though she still had faint reservations, she started stitching. She did not regard Xiao Xiao's skin as a cloth upon which she was embroidering, but made her stitches with even greater care and focus. Zhang Ruan's embroidery skill was actually exceptional, as was evidenced by how many years ago she had given her embroidery work to Zhang Lan in exchange for money back when she was in the rural residence. However, she had never undertaken such work as gravely as now. Lian Xiao watched as beads of perspiration appeared on Zhang Ruan's forehead, and her heart also clenched. Xiao Xiao endured Zhang Ruan's stitching without a word. Without anesthetic, he stoically kept silent, making no sound at all, simply staring fixedly at Zhang Ruan with tightly pressed lips. No one knew what he was thinking about, but his eyes seemed to shine even more brilliantly like stars. Although Baiji and Lian Xiao were mildly critical of Xiao Xiao's fainting in their young lady's courtyard, when they saw him this way, they could not help admiration for him from welling up. There were not many men in the world who could endure pain and suffering, and those who could endure pain such as that Xiao Xiao had to suffer were even more rare. At last, Zhang Ruan completed the final stitch and tied a knot in the silk thread before tossing the needle into her sewing box. She then sprinkled some medicinal powder to inhibit bleeding onto Xiao Xiao's wound. Tianzhu offered her a clean strip of white cloth. Zhang Ruan looked down, glancing between Xiao Xiao's bare chest and the strip of cloth. Zhang Ruan took the cloth and said to Tianzhu, "Help him to sit up." Tianzhu did as she said. Zhang Ruan threw Xiao Xiao's blood-soaked clothing to one side and asked Xiao Xiao to lower his head a little. Xiao Xiao was taken aback for a moment, seeming to come to a sudden realization. His handsome face reddened, and he turned his head aside with a sense of discomfort. Zhang Ruan did not notice his expression. Using both hands, she brought the cloth around his back and then back round to his front. In this way, it looked like Xiao Xiao was embracing her, and if she raised her head, she would touch his chin. Zhang Ruan kept her head bowed as she tied the ends of the cloth strip together. Xiao Xiao pursed his lips as he looked at Zhang Ruan, who was only a whisker away from him, and the fragrance of a young lady flooded his senses. That strange emotion once again emerged, and he felt an irresistible urge to draw the young lady before him into his arms. Baiji and Lian Xiao averted their eyes shyly and stayed absolutely still. After Zhang Ruan had finished bandaging the wound, she paused in thought, then asked Lian Xiao to boil some brown sugar water. Brown sugar water would strengthen the blood, and even though it was a tonic usually taken by women, It would not do to raise suspicions at this point in time. Xiao Xiao's expression had stiffened slightly. After everything had been managed, Zhang Ruan heaved a sigh of relief. She had not expected that it would be so extraordinarily tiring to treat and bandage Xiao Xiao's injury. Sitting beside the bed, she finally asked, "How did you come to faint here?" "There were ambushes all along my journey, and this place was the nearest," Xiao Xiao said. When he left the capital to handle matters, the South Xinjiang people had become increasingly bold. He had already been injured, and he was ambushed constantly en route. The South Xinjiang people excelled at using poison, and the people who had ambushed him tonight had all used miaogu, confirming his suspicions. Since those people in the capital had already formed an association with the South Xinjiang people, he was sure to be waylaid on his way to Jining Wangfu. Not wanting to beat the grass and scare off the snake, and seeing that Zhang Fu was right in front of him, he headed for Zhang Ruan's courtyard without second thought. In actual fact, his whereabouts should not be divulged to outsiders, but for some unknown reason, he felt that Zhang Ruan was someone he could trust. Thus, he had no qualms boldly entering Zhang Ruan's courtyard and allowing himself to faint there. Truthfully, his injuries were not a major issue, for he would be fine after some rest. However, observing Zhang Ruan bandage his injury in such a serious manner, he had simply decided to play dumb. At this time, Xiao Xiao still did not understand why his behavior was totally different from that in the past, and he also had no clue as to the meaning of this peculiar feeling. He had matured at an early age, but in matters of the heart, he was no better than a 15 or 16-year-old youth, allowing these sour, painful feelings to ferment in his heart. Zhang Ruan looked out of the window, and then at the hourglass to one side. It was already midnight. After ensuring that Xiao Xiao drank all of the brown sugar water, she lowered the drapes and said, "You had better sleep. I'll go outside." Xiao Xiao made as if to get off the bed. "There's no need, I will be fine outside." Zhang Ruan eyed him before saying, "If you are not afraid to implicate me, then go ahead and sleep outside. There is no shortage of informers in my courtyard, and my younger sisters are all dying to get their hands on any information which can be used against me. If you want to give them this information sooner, I owe you several favors, so I can say nothing." Xiao Xiao was slightly abashed in the face of Zhang Ruan's reprimand. On further consideration, it did seem that he was splitting hairs if he were to decline her invitation. It was just that it was somewhat inappropriate for a dignified man to occupy the bed of a lady in the inner chamber. However, since Zhang Ruan didn't find it wrong, he could only drop the subject. After Zhang Ruan had withdrawn from the room, Tianzhu, who had remained silent all this while, came forward and bowed deeply to Zhang Ruan in gratitude while saying, "This subordinate expresses boundless gratitude for Miss Benevolent Grace in saving a life." Zhang Ruan said nothing, so Tianzhu continued, "From this day onwards, this subordinate's life belongs to Mississippi. The situation today had been terribly risky. Perhaps Bai Ji and Lian Xiao had been ignorant of this, but she, as a member of the Genie Guard, was well aware of the danger. For Zhang Ruan to have braved the hidden forces in the capital to hide Xiao Xiao in her chamber and treat his injuries required immense courage. Moreover, from beginning to end, Zhang Ruan had stayed calm and collected, as if what she was involved in was no more than an everyday affair. Tianzhu reiterated, "From this day onwards, this subordinate's life belongs to Mississippi." Chapter 142, Shielding Xiao Xiao. Chapter 142, Shielding Xiao Xiao. When the rooster's crowing signaled daybreak, the young man on the bed tidied his clothes and stood up. After a night's rest, when coupled with Xiao Xiao's natural speed of recovery, which was faster than most, he looked as if nothing was amiss. Jin San jumped into the room through the window. Still slightly concerned about Xiao Xiao's injury, she asked, hesitatingly, "Master?" Xiao Xiao waved his hand and Jin San immediately shut up. Then after a moment's thought, she said, "Miss Zhang has already woken up and is outside." After Jin San left the room, Xiao Xiao took a good look at his surroundings. The previous night, everything had unfolded with such haste that he had not been able to take in anything. Today, upon waking, he discovered that a faint scent seemed to linger throughout the entire room. It was then that he realized that this was indeed a young lady's chamber. From the time that Xiao Xiao took over the Genie Guard, He had received all kinds of assignments, thus it was not as if he had never seen a young lady's inner chamber. However, before it had just been a place like any other, no different from a garden or a lake. Yet today was the first time that he realized that not all places were the same, so Xiao Xiao, this arrogant man who never wasted his time on inconsequential things, looked carefully and seriously around a lady's inner chamber for the very first time. Although it was an inner chamber, it didn't seem much like one. It was different from that of other ladies. There were no flowers or plants, bright and gaily colored drapes, or exquisitely beautiful ornaments. For a young lady who had recently reached marriageable age, it was all too austere. Even a man like Emotsong paid more attention to his residence than Zhang Ruan did. Xiao Xiao had heard something about the bleakly miserable circumstances which Zhang Quan had sent Zhang Ruan into at the rural residence. Therefore, it could be surmised that the practice of thrift which she had cultivated then still remained, and so she was unwilling to have resplendent decorations around. But these dark, gloomy colors were really rather unusual. The Zhang family's eldest daughter loved to wear red, and she was naturally lovely. When looking at her, she should burn with passion as fiercely as a red fox, but actually she was like a green snake, cold and detached. Deep black was the dominant color all around the room. What ordinary female would like the color black? Xiao Xiao himself liked black, but this was because he was both cold by nature, and had also matured earlier than his peers. However, Zhang Ruan was just a young lady. Xiao Xiao was slightly surprised. It was almost as if he could delve into the secrets of Zhang Ruan's soul through these gloomy colors. There was a stack of books on the table. Xiao Xiao casually flipped through them. They were mainly books on the Great Jin's laws and the art of war. These dry and boring topics were mostly read by old men, but the manual on war had been thumbed through so often that the pages were starting to yellow, clearly demonstrating that its owner read it frequently. Xiao Xiao also discovered that none of the books on law were current. They were at least a few years old, with some stretching as far back as more than 10 years. He honestly could not fathom what Zhang Ruan was doing reading such books. He silently stood where he was with his head lowered in thought. After a while, he averted his gaze and walked slowly out of the door. In the outer hall, Zhang Ruan was sitting in front of the window, but the book on the table was unopened. One hand propped up her chin as she stared out in contemplation. It was impossible to tell what she was thinking of, but her expression was a little cold. When she heard footsteps, Zhang Ruan turned and saw Xiao Xiao walking in. She asked, "Why aren't you resting more?" At present, it was as if Ruanju was separated from the rest of Jiangfu by an iron fence, for no one dared to poke their noses into Ruanju's affairs. Zhang Ruan disliked laying down regulations excessively, and so her maidservants and older female servants were somewhat more brazen than those of other courtyards. At this time, while she was awake, some of the maidservants and older female servants in Ruanju were still asleep. Xiao Xiao also had some misgivings. However, the rooster had just crowed, and looking at Zhang Ruan, she must have woken up earlier. His gaze landed on the faint smudges of black under Zhang Ruan's eyes, and he came to a sudden realization. With an apologetic note in his voice, he said, "You have worked hard." These words, coming out of nowhere, almost caused Bai Ji to laugh aloud. She lowered her head and made an excuse to leave the room so that Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao could talk privately. Zhang Ruan nodded. She had always been a light sleeper, and in reality, after she had been reborn into this lifetime, although she ordinarily looked calm and detached, when it came to night time, the nightmares of her previous life refused to leave her alone. Then, once she was jolted awake by the nightmares, she was unable to go back to sleep. If she had things on her mind, then she would sleep even more lightly. The previous night, Xiao Xiao had suddenly appeared. After she had settled her emotions and gone outside, there were still many thoughts weighing heavily on her mind. If it were not for Bai Ji and Lian Xiao persuading her constantly, she would not have slept even a few hours. Xiao Xiao sat opposite Zhang Ruan. Her eyes moved to his chest and she asked, "Is your wound better?" Xiao Xiao nodded and replied, "I will leave in a while." "You don't have to be so impatient," Zhang Ruan said, looking at him. "Drinking a bowl of brown sugar water before you leave will not cause you much delay." Xiao Xiao's expression slightly stiffened on hearing the mention of brown sugar water. It was not that he did not know of its efficacy, Jiang Ruan must have been drinking it recently because her period had started, but he was a hearty young man. If news of him drinking the brown sugar water reached the ears of the genie guard, how could he command them in future? Jiang Ruan noticed his unnatural appearance and found it quite funny. She changed the topic and asked, "How long will you be staying in the capital this time?" On hearing this, Xiao Xiao's expression turned grave, and Jiang Ruan understood why to some extent. He said, "Of late, the capital has been uneasy. You should be more careful in the Fu, and if anything happens, use the whistle I gave you." Jiang Ruan stared at him and asked, "The South Xinjiang people are about to make their move." Xiao Xiao was taken aback. This was classified information within the palace. For ordinary women, even if they knew about it, they would not think about it further. However, it seemed as if Jiang Ruan was very sensitive towards this particular topic, and his eyes as he gazed at Jiang Ruan held unconscious admiration as he said, "Yes, I understand." Jiang Ruan did not speak further on the topic. She paused, then said, "You are already being attacked on all sides. Since the South Xinjiang people are on the loose in the capital, they will most probably come for you. You must also be careful." In her previous life, the name of Jining Wang Xiao Xiao had always been linked with South Xinjiang. In her previous life, when the previous emperor died of poison and Xianli claimed the throne, Xiao Xiao had been in South Xinjiang and was unable to hurry back at a moment's notice. No one knew how the situation might have unfolded if Xiao Xiao had been in the capital at that time. On thinking about this, Jiang Ruan felt somewhat frustrated, but when she noticed Xiao Xiao watching her, she steadied herself. Although she had no clear idea of the reason, she felt that Xiao Xiao and South Xinjiang were related in some way. Whether it was due to a feud or something else, whenever Xiao Xiao interacted with South Xinjiang people, he always had a faint air of hostility about him. It was almost imperceptible, but because Jiang Ruan was a person who had died once, she understood that feeling very clearly. Xiao Xiao smiled faintly and his eyes softened as he said, "All right." After a beat of silence, he said, "What are you planning to do with the Xia family? Do you need my help?" After Jiang Ruan left the room the previous night, Tianzhu had entered and reported on everything that had occurred, both big and small, in minute detail. Xiao Xiao was greatly annoyed when he heard that Yuya had planned to entrap Xiao Feizhou. These people were really like flies, constantly buzzing around and being disgusting. Jiang Ruan patted his arm and said, "No need to worry. Since I was willing to risk letting you stay here last night, I have already made preparations." Xiao Xiao stared at her. His guilt towards her deepened even further. He never thought that a moment's rashness would bring Jiang Ruan so much trouble. He had 1,001 ways to get away, but not one of them was foolproof. He would inevitably leave traces behind, which would cause trouble for Jiang Ruan at some point. Nevertheless, on hearing Jiang Ruan say this, he reckoned that she must have a good solution and was all ears. Jiang Ruan walked to the front of the bed in her own room and lifted the thick mattress, exposing the sturdy, heavy bed frame. Stretching out her hand, she knocked against the bedboard, then felt around the edge. The bedboard was seemingly without crack or crevice, but as she felt around, a crack amazingly appeared in a corner of the bedboard. She pulled upwards and the solid-looking bedboard lifted up, revealing a small metal door with a little lock. Jiang Ruan retrieved a silver key from the foot of the bed on the other side, unlocked the door, and after lifting it up instructed Xiao Xiao, "Get in." Surprisingly, it hid a small secret path. "It's not a secret path." Observing Xiao Xiao's dumbfounded expression, Jiang Ruan went on to explain, "I don't have the ability to achieve that. It's just a storage space. Go in and stay there for a while." She had constructed this storage space bit by bit after she had returned to the Fu. In her previous life in the palace, she had, by fluke, seen one of the nobles do this, except that he had dug a secret passage. She was surrounded by enemies on all sides in Jiangfu, so it was inevitable that someone would take the opportunity to ransack her room when she was not around. Although she would not leave any incriminating information or item around, this storage space would be useful in the occasional emergency. Xiao Xiao was thoroughly astounded by Jiang Ruan's unexpected revelation, but at Baiji's urging he hesitated no longer and jumped in straightaway. Jiang Ruan closed the door and restored the bed to the way it had been before. Then, she let down the curtains of the canopy. Lian Xiao's voice sounded somewhat anxious as she said, "Fourth Miss, Miss has not woken up yet. Please wait for Miss to freshen up and come out. She has not even applied her makeup yet. We are all sisters," Zhang Dan's voice could be heard saying in the distance. Although her voice was as soft and tender as it usually was, on listening carefully, there seemed to be a joy that was being concealed. As Zhang Dan took in Lian Xiao's anxious appearance, she felt a greater sense of surety. The night before, her personal maidservant had gone to throw out water, and had witnessed the neighboring Ruanju's Lian Xiao scurrying out in the dead of night, in the direction of the little kitchen. Curious, the maidservant had followed her, whereupon she overheard Lian Xiao ordering the little kitchen to prepare a bowl of brown sugar water for her. There was nothing really unusual about this. Zhang Ruan's period had started, and it was good to drink a bowl of brown sugar water if she felt uncomfortable in the middle of the night. However, this was not the only curious matter, as Baiji had also ordered clean, hot water to be brought over. The maidservant had simply thought that Zhang Ruan wanted to take a bath in the middle of the night, and innocently mentioned this to Zhang Dan later. Zhang Dan had been stirred to thought. Zhang Ruan had never liked to make a fuss about anything, and had never once been uncomfortable due to her period. All these happenings at night also made a lot of work for the maidservants. Suspicious, Zhang Dan had sent someone to investigate. Sure enough, after bribing an old servant who swept Ruanju and also served as gatekeeper, they found out that Baiji had thrown out water reeking of blood. Zhang Dan had a gut feeling that there was a reason for all of this, and it just so happened that her personal maidservant Yuer had an elder brother who was on duty at the gatehouse. Later, she ran into the young manservant from the gatehouse, who had told her that the leader of the capital's city gate troops, Yan Dong, was leading his men in a hunt for an assassin. Every day that Zhang Ruan lived peacefully was a day of extreme unease for Zhang Dan. Right now, opportunity had come knocking at her door. Why would she not seize it? In a trice, a plan had come to mind. However, Zhang Dan had never given in to hasty action or emotion, and she was unwilling to startle Zhang Ruan into a state of alert. Moreover, looking for the city gate leader would take some time. If something unforeseen should occur and the assassin escaped, it would all be a wasted effort, and she would also incur the unhappiness of the city gate leader. After turning it over in her mind, Zhang Dan decided it would be best to keep quiet for the moment and let everything calm down. She would make plans at daybreak. Zhulanda Shui. Lit. Drawing water in a wicker basket, i.e. wasted effort. When it was still early, she secretly sent someone to casually alert the city gate leader that someone seemed to have seen the assassin outside Jiangfu. The leader Yendong was not stupid. He knew that he did not have the authorized documents to immediately enter Jiangfu to seize anyone. Moreover, Jiang Quan's rank was much higher than his own. Although this was the situation, he could still wait outside Jiangfu and seize his easy target as soon as it appeared. If everything had been as usual, all this would have been observed by Jean Eyre and Jean San, and nothing would have come of these plans. However, it happened that, due to Xiao Xiao's injuries the previous night, the two of them had been sent out of the Fu to do his bidding. Tianzhu had been busy helping Zhang Ruan, and so unknowingly a loophole had been created for Zhang Dan to exploit. The gatehouse guard had kept watch, and no one had left Zhang Ruan's courtyard. Thus, it was increasingly certain that the assassin was still in Zhang Ruan's room. Zhang Dan was elated. Harboring an assassin, hiding an assassin in her own private bedchamber, even Empress Dowager Ida would not be able to protect Zhang Ruan, and would even have to remove her from the royal genealogy. Then this Zhang Ruan with her despoiled reputation, what future could she have? You die, lit. J disc. Apparently these discs recorded the imperial genealogy, starting from the Tang dynasty. On thinking of this, she hastened her footsteps and arrived at Zhang Ruan's door. Not waiting for Tianzhu and Lu Zhu to speak, she pushed aside the curtain at the door and said, with a smile, "De Jiejia." The room was extremely quiet. From the mouth of the uniquely shaped copper deer figurine at the corner of the table issued forth the distinct fragrance of Palea japonica. The dark canopy of the bed was swaying faintly, causing the silhouette of the figure within to shift accordingly. One could faintly discern that it was a woman's figure. Palea japonica seed. Palea japonica. Zhang Dan swept a glance across the burning incense and the corners of her mouth ticked upwards. Everyone knew that Zhang Ruan hated using incense. Ruanju had always refused the incense that was distributed every month. Today's unprecedented use of Palea japonica had an abundantly clear reason. Wasn't it to mask the smell of blood? With these thoughts, Zhang Dan walked further into the room and called out, "Dejejia." "Fourth miss," Lu Zhu said as she blocked her way. "Miss is still resting. She felt uncomfortable last night, so she is getting up later today." Zhang Dan laughed. "What kind of joke is this?" Just now Lian Xiao said Dejejia was already awake but had not put on her makeup yet. So how is it that she is lying down once again? It can't be because she doesn't welcome Dan Yang. As she spoke, she attempted to move forwards, but Lu Zhu stood in front of her. Zhang Dan smiled, whereupon Yuer grabbed Lu Zhu with surprising force and said, smilingly, "Eldest miss and fourth miss are sisters. How can it be that such a small matter would make people upset?" Exactly. By now Zhang Dan had already reached Zhang Ruan's bed. Her eyes flashed radiantly as she immediately stretched out her hand to lift the dark canopy. As soon as the dark canopy was lifted, the inner scene was revealed. An elaborately decorated pouch hung at each corner, heavily scenting the room with fragrance. Zhang Ruan reclined on the bed wearing light-colored inner garments, with her hair loose and her eyes closed in repose. Hearing movement, Zhang Ruan opened her eyes. A pair of clear black eyes which glimmered like a limpid mountain spring, stared fixedly at Zhang Dan. Yet these eyes also harbored an indecipherable deeper meaning. Zhang Ruan's voice was somewhat frosty as she said, "Fourth sister truly does not consider herself an outsider since she dares to lift my canopy so casually." Zhang Dan was rooted to the ground, her eyes wide in disbelief. Apart from Zhang Ruan, the bed within the canopy was empty. Where could anyone hide? Chapter 143. A beauty emerges from a bath. Chapter 143. A beauty emerges from a bath. Zhang Dan lifted the canopy curtain, but the interior was empty. Lu Zhu's and Lian Xiao's unusual behavior had confirmed Zhang Dan's guess that that man was still in the room. As such, she was unwilling to accept what she saw right now. She urgently scanned every inch of the room, but no matter where she looked, it was abundantly clear that there was no one else there. It all seemed to be a joke. Zhang Dan forced herself to smile. Focusing on the copper deer figurine, from which incense rose in swirling spirals, she said, "Hasn't Dejejia always disliked this incense? How is it that you are using it today?" "True, I don't really like it," Zhang Ruan replied unhurriedly, "but I'm using it to cover up the smell in the room." Zhang Dan looked up abruptly, not quite understanding why Zhang Ruan would answer in this way. Wasn't this an admission? Zhang Ruan smiled faintly and said, "My period has started and my body feels out of sorts. Why is fourth sister looking at me like that?" Believing that Zhang Ruan was simply toying with her, Zhang Dan was so furious that she almost vomited blood. Her words were intolerable, but she could not figure out how to retort. Upon looking around the room again, one could see that Zhang Ruan had very few decorative elements, and apart from the bed, there was nowhere else a big, living person could be hidden. Today had been a fruitless endeavor. Although Zhang Dan's hopes had not been achieved, she still had doubts, and so she stood where she was at a loss as to what to do next. Zhang Ruan sat up on the bed. While she gathered up her long hair, she stated, "Fourth sister will be entering the palace selection in a few days." "That's right," Zhang Dan said with her head lowered, slightly startled. "I think fourth sister must be very happy these days," Zhang Ruan said as she nonchalantly examined her nails. "Since this is the case, it would be a good idea to stay in your room every day. If anything should happen at this critical juncture, it would be such a pity." Her words held a tinge of ice, and Zhang Dan heard the warning behind them loud and clear. This was a cold war. She was familiar with Zhang Ruan's methods, and if something really did happen, wouldn't that mean that all her efforts would go to waste? Even though she was deeply unwilling to yield, Zhang Dan schooled her expression so none of her true thoughts were revealed. Instead, she reverted to her usual delicate and timid expression, with some degree of cowardice. She nodded and said, "Dejejia has taught me an important lesson. Now Dan Yang will return to her courtyard and read lessons for women well." Nu Jia, often translated as lessons for women, Other translations include Admonishments for Women. This book was written by the Han Dynasty female intellectual Ban Zhao, the first known Chinese female historian, for her daughters. The book outlines the 4 virtues a woman must abide by and describes the status and position of women in society. More here. After Zhang Dan left, Lu Zhu angrily said, "Fourth Miss clearly had bad intentions. Seeing her like this, I'm really hoping that something happens to her." Lu Zhu knew all about the relationship between Zhang Dan and Zhang Ruan from the time she entered the Fu with Zhang Ruan. It stood to reason that Zhang Dan should be close to Zhang Ruan since she had been raised by Zhao Mei. But in the end, she enjoyed laughing at others' misfortune and adding fuel to the fire. She was truly sinister. Although Lu Zhu had lived in the marketplace earlier in her life, even she understood the principle of repaying a debt of gratitude. This was the first time she had encountered someone who bit the hand which had fed her. Zhang Ruan remained silent. At present, Lu Zhu was only seeing the tip of the iceberg. Since Zhao Mei's death and Zhang Dan were inextricably linked, she would not let Zhang Dan off lightly. What harm would there be in helping Zhang Dan enter the palace as she was so set on it? No one understood more clearly than Zhang Ruan what life in the palace was like. Slowly tormenting Zhang Dan there would be even more painful than devising a way to get rid of her sooner. Lu Zhu noticed the hostility in her Miss eyes and was somewhat taken aback. Then, as if she had remembered something, she said, "Since Fourth Miss has left, let's release Xiao Wangya. It must be so stuffy in there." Upon reflection, Xiao Xiao was indeed a precious child, born with a golden spoon in his mouth. It must have been really hard on him to be stuffed like an object into a small, stifling storage space. Tianzhu and Baiji kept watch outside the door while Zhang Ruan lifted up the bedboard and opened the metal door to allow Xiao Xiao to squeeze his way out. Once out, he was slightly stunned as he took in Zhang Ruan's appearance. His handsome face flushed, and he looked away uncomfortably. Zhang Ruan was only wearing a snow-white inner garment and had forgotten this fact after Zhang Dan left, so she found Xiao Xiao's movement a little strange. However, Lu Zhu uttered, softly and hurriedly found a cloak to serve as Zhang Ruan's armor, encasing her torso tightly. Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao were both quite vexed. This Xiao Xiao had not only slept on Zhang Ruan's bed but had also seen her body. No matter which way one looked at this, it was Zhang Ruan who would bear the greater cost. Underscore. Zhongyi. Zhongyi, also known as lining, is the shirt of Hanfu, which plays the role of matching and foiling. Mostly white, there are mainly middle clothes, middle skirts, middle trousers and middle singles. The middle clothes can be matched with formal dresses or regular clothes, and can be used as home clothes at the same time. More here. Now covered up, Zhang Ruan seemed to realize the reason for Xiao Xiao's peculiar movements, and could not help but raise her eyes to look at him. In doing so, she just so happened to meet Xiao Xiao's gaze. This young lady's appearance was matchless. The lack of cosmetics enhanced her beauty even more profoundly, a beauty as deep as her bones. It was as if the most beautiful, rose-tinged cloud from the farthest reaches of Great Jin graced a bleak autumn landscape. In the slanting sunbeams, she was as brilliant as a spring flower. Her fierceness was gone, and with a slightly dazed look in her eyes, she was like a tantalizing little cub, enticing people to place all their attention on her. Zhang Ruan was also looking at him. This young man stood tall and upright, his flesh white as snow, his eyes like dots of lacquer, and his eyebrows like ink. Qilin striding through fire and riding the wind were embroidered with fine gold thread on the black material of his clothes. His thin lips were slightly pursed, enhancing his elegance and incomparable bearing. Moreover, on closer examination, while his heroic spirit was compelling, he was also extremely detached with a bone-deep elegance. In all, he was truly innately distinguished. In this world, there was truly such a beautiful person mysteriously dressed in black, with jet black hair, like an exceptional Qilin, naturally honorable, with a splendid temperament. The two of them looked at one another, each one displaying minute shifts in expression, seemingly in awe of the other, and also as if some kind of emotion was trying to break through. Lian Qiao and Lu Zhu stood quietly to one side, and the sunlight was gentle and kind, as if unwilling to disturb this tranquil tableau. This moment was as serene as the green hills in the distance. It was not as if Xiao Xiao had never met a beauty. He himself had been born outstandingly handsome and elegant, Yet he had always considered one's appearance to be a mere matter of skin. All along, he had known that Zhang Ruan was not bad-looking, but it was at this moment that this young lady's beauty became profoundly clear to him. She was nothing like any of the beauties he had seen before. Obviously, she had a frigid heart, but her appearance was charming and ardent. Moreover, when she was gentle and refined, she seemed to be another person altogether, calm and good-natured. Yet he knew well that this was an illusion. Oh! This young lady was different from anyone he had ever met. She was undeniably full of evil tendencies, yet she was able to conceal this under a peaceful facade in an instant. What kind of fate had caused her to become the person she was now? The cloak was wrapped tightly around her so that only Zhang Ruan's small face, the size of his palm, was revealed. Abruptly, Xiao Xiao thought of the young lady before him wearing plain snow-white clothes. He knew that she detested the color white and was most unwilling to wear it. However, when she wore those inner garments, she seemed gentle and frail, like a newly bloomed lotus, trembling to stay upright amidst the branches. It was like a light wind carrying the promise of spring breezed past, and blew the image of that flower into his heart. And now who knows how or when there was an impression of her on his rock-hard heart. He was faintly startled by the undulating currents of his heart. Although he had never experienced passion, he nevertheless understood what these tremors of emotion signified. Unlike the shallow and wavering inclinations of the past, from the time he subconsciously came to regard this courtyard as a place he could trust, Xiao Xiao realized what the difference was. Last night, she had been calm, and her actions gentle yet resolute as she bandaged his wound without the slightest hesitation. Time suddenly ran backwards, and he felt as if he had returned to Bao Guang Temple all those years ago. That young girl who did not seem to know the taste of anxiety opened a pair of limpid, clear eyes, looked at him and smiled. And on that cold and lonely night, a cold and lonely young man found a sliver of warmth within the dense mass of murderous intent within his heart. Now that young girl had grown into this decisive, cold and detached young lady, capable of sophisticated and subtle shrewdness. When she took action, no blood would be shed, but the impact would be severe. Yet, it could also be seen that on that cold and lonely night, merely bringing a basin of clean water, while smiling and chatting, showed that everything could be easily resolved without a trace of panic. He looked at Zhang Ruan intently and said, "I will take responsibility. Wafu Zi. Polite speak for I will marry you." Zhang Ruan was stunned for a split second. Within Xiao Xiao's dark eyes was a night sky sprinkled liberally with diamonds, and the brilliance of it seemed to draw one in irresistibly. After saying these words, Xiao Xiao watched Zhang Ruan closely, and an almost unnoticeable tension was fleetingly seen in his eyes. In his lifetime, he had persevered through countless dangers, but facing a lethal threat head-on was nothing compared to this nervousness. Lu Zhu and Lian Qiao did not know whether to stay or leave, and perspiration beaded their foreheads. Lian Qiao was still hesitant, but Lu Zhu looked at Zhang Ruan with hopeful eyes. What kind of person Xiao Xiao was had duly been noted by the maidservants recently. To be by Xiao Xiao's side would grant their miss the greatest stability. Although their miss handled matters with great assertiveness on a daily basis, even they, as the maidservants closest to her, sometimes felt that the distance between them and Zhang Ruan was so large. If only one person could enter her heart and protect her, perhaps Zhang Ruan would not be so lonely. After a moment of astonishment, Zhang Ruan laughed lightly. Her laughter was gentle, yet held a hint of self-loathing. Xiao Xiao's keen ears caught this undercurrent of emotion as he heard her say, "Xiao Xiao, you know I don't care about such things." So a diplomatic refusal. Xiao Xiao felt a brief sense of loss, but it did not persist for long. If it were so easy to move the heart and mind of this person before him, then it would not be her. He nodded and said, "The door of Jinying Wangfu is always open for you." After a pause he added, "I will always stand by your side." Zhang Ruan nodded and said, "Many thanks." She looked outside the window and said, "Since this is the case, you don't have to be in a hurry to return. Anyway, there are people waiting for you outside. It might be better to delay." Xiao Xiao initially wanted to decline, but he suddenly changed his mind and said, "Very well." Jean San, who had been listening outside the room with contentment in her heart, stared at the door with incredulity. They clearly had to visit by Zhonglu today, but just because of Zhang Ruan's words, Xiao Xiao had changed his mind, and had even made it seem as if her words were highly rational. When an ordinarily honorable person tells a lie, it truly is hypocritical. Xiao Xiao was totally oblivious to his underling's silent criticism. He simply felt that this situation had been arranged to his utter satisfaction, and he even felt that, this time, his being injured had been quite good. It was just that Zhang Ruan did not seem to be aware that a man had been added to the room, and merely carried on doing what she had to do without the smallest sign of unease. This caused Xiao Xiao to feel a little depressed. That day one would have thought that enough had happened, but who could have imagined, come night time, something else would transpire. In the outer courtyard of Ruanju, Lu Zhu was sitting with Jean Eyre, and they were not fighting for once. On the contrary, she asked, a little nervously, "Is this really possible?" Jean Eyre nodded his head solemnly and replied, "It should be possible." "I think so too," Lu Zhu said in agreement. "That's how it happened in the play I saw." "What kind of play?" Jean Eyre exclaimed. "Something performed by one of those risque entertainment troupes?" Having said this, he gave a beastly laugh and continued, "Never would I have imagined that one as young as you would like this kind of thing." Lu Zhu's small face flushed angrily as she kicked him and yelled, "That's nothing on you, you crazed nutjob. Not afraid that one day you'll injure the root of your progeny and become useless trash." And with that, she left in a huff, leaving Jean Eyre with his mind in a whirl. He absolutely detested people who doubted his capability. Very well, this wench had pushed his buttons one too many times. Meanwhile, no matter what was transpiring outside, everyday affairs were proceeding as usual. After dinner, Zhang Ruan went in search of some books to bring back. Although Xiao Xiao was in the room, he scrupulously abided by etiquette, and their interactions were fairly easy. She was about to enter the room when she realized that there was no one outside, and found that somewhat peculiar. Then she saw Lu Zhu scurrying inside to take away the tea from that morning. Zhang Ruan asked, "Where's Lian Qiao and the others?" "Lian Qiao Jie and Bai Ji Jie have gone to prepare brown sugar water for Xiao Wangya," Lu Zhu lied without batting an eyelid. "Tianzhu Jie and Jin San Jie have something to discuss." Zhang Ruan felt this was rather strange, but did not give it further thought. She nodded and said, "All right, you go ahead." Lu Zhu left carrying the teapot. Zhang Ruan walked into the room. She had just entered when she heard a kacha sound, and looked back to see that the locks to both the inner and outer rooms had been dropped. In order to secure the rooms against possible disturbances at night, Zhang Ruan had added a door to both the inner and outer rooms, and had intentionally made the doors lockable. However, she never thought that she would be locked in by Lu Zhu today. Structural analysis of ancient Chinese wooden locks, Science Direct. Wooden bar door lock. Zhang Ruan's eyebrows lifted slightly. Since it was her own maidservant doing this, there was no way that any harm was intended to befall her. Although she could not discern Lu Zhu's intention, Zhang Ruan was not worried in the least. She looked thoughtfully at the locked door, then turned to face the curtain of the inner room. It was not the pearl crystal curtain normally favored by ladies, but an ordinary rain silk brocade curtain, light green in color due to the period of mourning. She peered through the gauzy curtain, but could not detect any figures beyond. Zhang Ruan paused, then drew aside the curtain and walked in boldly. However, the second she stepped in she discovered that she was wrong, but there was no chance to retreat. Indeed, there had been no one visible in the room, but at some unknown time, a screen had been erected next to the soft couch, and presently a tall and thin figure with a slender waist and narrow hips, and a lean and slender silhouette could now be seen. And every movement conveyed the sense of beauty with great power. The next moment, from behind the screen, Xiao Xiao stepped out before her wearing a jade-colored robe. This beauty was like a spring flower. Oh! Zhang Ruan was totally lost as to how to react. She could talk easily about collapses and turning plans upside down, but at this present moment she could only stare blankly. Xiao Xiao had foregone his usual black clothes for this jade-colored gown which was draped loosely about him, exposing much of his magnificently fair skin. His flesh was the color of the purest white jade, and he seemed to glow with the luster of moonlight under the light. With his red lips and white teeth, eyes like stars and elegant eyebrows, He looked like he had stepped leisurely out of a painting of an immortal who had been banished to live on earth. Gone was his cold elegance, and in its place was a gentle beauty. He had a bewitching charm which was out of the ordinary for him. Zhang Ruan stood where she was, stunned. Xiao Xiao was also startled, probably because he had not expected that he would see Zhang Ruan as soon as he came forth. The shock of their encounter was such that both of them stared at each other, unable to move. After a while, Xiao Xiao lightly coughed and walked over to sit by the side of the soft couch as if nothing had happened, casually arranging his robes. His jet-black hair, worn loose, hung past his shoulders, enhancing even more his jade-like appearance. In her previous life, Zhang Ruan had considered Xian Li to be the gentlest man she had ever met. Even though she now saw through his facade, she could not help but concede that Xian Li did look good, such that outsiders who saw him would call him a first-class gentleman. However, the person before her currently, with a mere casual movement, had set himself so much higher than Xian Li, as high as the heavens are from the earth. Completely different from that person who meticulously constructed his image and appearance in the eyes of the world, Xiao Xiao's entire being exuded a special beauty. Everyone called her a demoness of national calamity, but in her opinion, the phrase national calamity could only refer to Xiao Xiao. Qian Qian Junzi when run are you. Lit. Modest nobleman as gentle as jade. This is one of the highest praises one can give a man, and describes his moral character, temperament and influence on others, among other things. The Chinese have always loved jade and imbued it with many qualities. As a result, jade is used in many metaphors as the highest possible standard of something. Xiao Xiao finally seemed unable to tolerate her gaze. He turned his head and gave her a teasing smile. With his lips curling upwards and arched brows he said, "Do you admire me that much?" When a cold and detached person smiles, his profoundly deep eyes seem to shine with even greater brilliance, and that one smile enhances his exceptional qualities. It is a different kind of allurement. Zhang Ruan was stupefied, never imagining that she would ever hear such words from Xiao Xiao's mouth. She immediately looked at him and assessed him from top to toe before giving her critical evaluation. Bone structure is elegant, beauty is shown to the best advantage, features are picturesque, physique is sturdy. Truly, a beauty. The corners of Beauty Zhao's mouth twitched as he glanced obliquely at her. Putting away his alluring attitude, he retrieved a white porcelain bottle from within his robes and said, "I have to apply medicine, you turn around." He opened his robes to expose the scar on his chest, a shocking sight. When Zhang Ruan saw Xiao Xiao struggling a little to deal with his injury, she walked over and took the bottle from his hand saying, "Don't stand on ceremony, let me do this." There should be no direct physical contact between men and women, Xiao Xiao reminded her. Nan nu shou shou biu qin. Attributed to Mencius, this is a Confucian principle of propriety between unmarried men and women. To be more precise, unmarried men and women should not touch hands when they give or receive things. Zhang Ruan said expressionlessly, "I have seen everything that should be seen, as well as everything that shouldn't be, and I've touched everything. You might as well consider me a man." Initially, when Xiao Xiao heard the first half of Zhang Ruan's words, he felt rather satisfied, but once he heard the latter half, he felt that something was a little off. Looking down at the crown of the young lady who had drawn closer to him, he restrained himself and said again, "I can take responsibility." With deliberate intent, Zhang Ruan pressed down hard on the wound. Sure enough, she heard Xiao Xiao's stifled groan, and it was only then that she let up on the pressure and casually said, "It would be a much better idea to build up your body first. You're so weak, how can you take responsibility?" Xiao Xiao's face blackened once again. Steward Lin and several other subordinates secretly discussed how he was as romantic as a stone on a daily basis. He felt that this group of people should be made to observe Zhang Ruan because only then they would understand who was truly unromantic. Zhang Ruan was also rather puzzled. Out of the blue, Xiao Xiao had become a little rascal, and why had she never realized that he was so annoying? The people who were standing guard outside were all lined up with their ears glued to the door, hoping to be able to detect any kind of activity. However, they did not dare to make it too obvious, and with two doors between them, they could hardly hear anything, only indistinct sounds. One person said, "AI, I think I heard young master cry out. Young foreign is indeed a hero, someone else said in praise. She has completely won us over, said another voice excitedly. Unfortunately, the two people inside the room were ambiguous in their interactions, with hardly any intimacy, tragically wasting the golden opportunity which their subordinates had painstakingly created for them. If Steward Lin could see the situation now, he would undoubtedly sigh once again. This child cannot be taught. Chapter 144 Xianlang's Probing. Chapter 144 Xianlang's Probing. The night passed but nothing happened. Taking into account Xiao Xiao's personality, he wouldn't do anything to overstep the bounds of what was proper. But their relationship should still be considered a bit closer. Unexpectedly, when the servants opened the door early the next morning, the two people's expressions were both indifferent with none of the expected bashfulness. Everyone knew that they had made a mistake, so the servants obediently went to receive punishment. After Xiao Xiao left, Zhang Ruan dismissed everyone, then sat down with a stack of books in the study. Within one of them was a map of the area between the southern border and Tianjin Kingdom. At Great Jin's southern border was a river, beyond which was Tianjin. Last night, Xiao Xiao had returned from outside the capital with severe injuries. Although he didn't say anything, Zhang Ruan felt it had to be related to Tianjin in the south, and on thinking deeper, it was plausible that something must have gone wrong on the battlefield. However, she had no way of going to the battlefield herself to check. And ever since news spread of Tianjin's successful counterattack, Zhang Xinji hadn't sent any letters back home. Furthermore, with Zhang Xinji's temperament, he would definitely hide it from her to keep her from worrying, but if he hadn't even sent letters to the main house, the state of affairs must be very worrisome. Zhang Ruan faintly frowned. If Tianjin was trying to make trouble, the imperial court could easily solve the urgent need by sending reinforcements. However, the Zhao family could only raise 200,000 soldiers. Moreover, some people had to remain behind to guard the capital. The remaining warriors were either privately employed by the 8th prince or from the 5th prince, Xianhua's faction. Thus, how could Xianli obediently send them as reinforcements? Even if the emperor issued an imperial decree, it was inevitable that he'd try to manipulate the situation in his favor. Zhang Xinji was now in high demand. With Xianli's character, he'd definitely kill him if he couldn't use him. If Zhang Xinji really landed in prison, it wouldn't be a surprise if Xianli kicked him while he was down. Zhang Ruan got up, thought for a moment, then said, "I'll make a trip to the palace." In the imperial study, the emperor put down the letter he held and knocked on his desk. Only after a long time did he raise his head to look at the young man in front of him. "Ah Xiao, you want to lead troops?" Xiao Xiao was silent. "Imperial Mother, Empress Dowager, won't agree," the emperor commented. "Back then." "I have already forgotten it," Xiao Xiao interrupted. "Your Majesty needn't mention it again." "That's good." The emperor continued. "Let's not speak of this for the time being. Zhan heard that you and Hong and Junju are very close, and you even rested in her courtyard when you were injured last night? Since your Majesty knows everything, there is no need to ask this subject." The emperor's tone became stern. "She is from the Jiang family. So what? Could it be that you truly like her?" The emperor became agitated, causing Eunuch Li, who was standing next to him, to come forward and pat his back to calm him down. The emperor waved him away. "Zhen knows you have your own ideas, but it can't be Zhang Ruan." "Why?" Xiao Xiao asked. "Why?" the emperor repeated. "You are more clear than Zhen what kind of person Jiang Quan is." "She is also Zhao Guang's granddaughter," Xiao Xiao reminded. "So what?" the emperor said angrily. "Ah Xiao, your life can't be stained by any blemishes. Hong and Junju isn't worthy of you. Zhen is not blind. That girl has a deep mind, and so how can the two of you have a good end? Moreover, although Zhao Guang holds military power, he is too frank while Jiang Quan is too poisonous. If you associate with her, not only will she not bring any help, she will also pull you into muddy waters." In Zhen's view, Governor Yao of Binhai has a daughter similar in age, who is both smart and good at martial arts. Also, the forces behind Miss Yao would be helpful for you. She is the best match for you. "Your Majesty worries too much," Xiao Xiao said coldly. This subject will take care of his own marriage, and doesn't wish to bother your majesty. Yu, the emperor, seeming very insistent on this matter, responded in a frigid tone. If Zhen insists on you marrying Miss Yao, and grants you a marriage edict tomorrow, what would you do? Xiao Xiao raised an eyebrow. In that case, without any better option, this subject can only resist the decree and refuse the marriage. Then heads will roll. The emperor coughed again. However, before he could say anything else, Xiao Xiao opened his mouth and said, "Things at the southern border are urgent. Your Majesty does not need to spend effort on this subject's private matters." As for Miss Yao, his dark eyes were deep and cold, his voice completely flat. "If your Majesty bestows marriage, that would merely waste a life." Saying so, he immediately left without a backwards glance. Uniquely supported the tottering emperor who was on the verge of collapse, and hurriedly dug out a small porcelain bottle from his robe to pour out 2 pills for the emperor. Only then did his pallor improve a bit. The emperor sighed, his expression desolate. He disobeyed Zhen for that girl. "Your Majesty," Uniquely gently persuaded, "you have known Xiao Wangya's temper since he was a child. Once he's made a decision, not even 9 bulls can pull him back." When he heard your Majesty's words, Xiao Wangya must have been unhappy in his heart, so his words were a little impulsive. However, his feelings have never changed. Of course Zhen knows he remains true to Zhen. The emperor pressed his temples in exhaustion. Zhen did all this for him. Miss Yao is learned and sensible, and Zhen has seen with his own eyes that she is beautiful. If Governor Yao can support a Xiao, his days will be much easier in the future. Zhen has paved his way for him, yet he refuses to walk it. Xiao Wangye is a young man after all, Uniquely advised. Perhaps he and Hong and Junju have a special relationship. Moreover, Xiao Wangye places great importance on righteousness and loyalty, and would never establish a connection to elevate his status. There's an easy way, but he insists on taking the most difficult path. The emperor snorted coldly. That girl Zhang Ruan seems easygoing, but Zhen has seen it clearly. She has a deep mind and, like a Xiao, has an extremely cold personality. How can they live well together? And her brother Zhang Xing. Those two have their own ideas and aren't easy to control, especially Zhang Xing. If he ever gives rise to rebellious thoughts, the world will fall into chaos. Uniquely was at a loss as to how to comfort him because he knew that Xiao Xiao was the biggest knot in the emperor's heart. The emperor was wise and decisive in all things, but as soon as Xiao Xiao was involved, he lost the ability to clearly see the situation. Xiao Xiao wasn't a person who was easily moved by others. Since he made himself clear today, if the emperor disregarded him and bestowed him a marriage, the daughter of the Yao family might just disappear from the world the next day. Uniquely had seen what Xiao Xiao was capable of. If that happened, the Yao family and the imperial family would turn against each other, causing a big disaster. The emperor let out a long sigh. Forget it, we will discuss this matter later. He'd instinctively disliked Zhang Ruan from the very beginning. Although it sounded strange, people in high positions tended to develop a hypersensitive sense about certain matters. For example, every time Zhang Ruan talked to him, he could detect traces of resentment even though nothing was wrong on the surface. Although the feeling was faint, the emperor just didn't like Zhang Ruan. As he saw it, Princess Yuanrong had been gentle, considerate of the big picture, and was the noblest princess in the world. Empress Dowager Ida said that Zhang Ruan resembled Princess Yuanrong by a few points, but in truth it could be seen from Imperial Consort Chen's incident that Zhang Ruan wasn't nearly as gentle and generous as she appeared on the surface. No, she was an exceedingly small-minded person, it was just that she hid it very deeply. Ever since he came to know that Xiao Xiao had an unusual relationship with her, he had sent people to investigate. And the more he looked into her, the more he realized that she embodied the phrase, "Still waters run deep." The emperor could never allow a dangerous person to stay by Xiao Xiao's side. He himself didn't know why he disliked her. Maybe it was a hatred inherited from a past life. There were many things in this world that couldn't be explained clearly. The conversation between Xiao Xiao and the emperor, like the ambergris incense lit within the imperial study, faded away in the blink of an eye. Now Zhang Ruan, who'd already met and talked with Empress Dowager Ida, Return to the princess residence with Tianzhu and the others. Unexpectedly, just as they arrived at the front door, she bumped into an acquaintance. Fourth Prince Xianlang. Although Xianlang was fourth prince, he wore a somewhat old dark brown robe which was only accompanied by a single jade ornament at his waist, looking extraordinarily plain. In the eyes of people who like to think too much, he undoubtedly gave the impression of an unfavored prince. Upon seeing Zhang Ruan, fourth prince approached her and gave a bow. Junju. It seemed like Xianlang was used to always pleasing others, so there was a hint of humility in his tone. But when his voice fell into Zhang Ruan's ears, she only felt that he could compete with Zhang Dan. She smiled and replied, "Fourth Highness." A flash of hurt flew past Xianlang's eyes at her indifferent attitude, but he soon collected himself and smiled back. "I heard the military situation at Tianjin is tense, so I thought that Junju must be very worried. Since Junju is in a good mood, I can be relieved." Zhang Ruan raised an eyebrow. She wasn't afraid of him asking, rather she only feared that he wouldn't ask. As expected, Xianli had connections to Tianjin. Now that Xianlang coincidentally ran into her, wasn't it just to test her attitude? Perfect. She also wanted to see what ideas they had and why they needed to test her. "How can I be in a good mood?" she sighed. Her eyes dimmed, and her tone involuntarily became melancholic. "My elder brother is fighting enemies at the border, yet I can still enjoy a peaceful life. The war is hanging by a knife edge, and he hasn't sent letters home in a long time. I feel sick with worry every time I think of it." Xianlang's eyes flashed as he intently observed Zhang Ruan. Seeing that she didn't seem to be pretending, he comforted, "Deputy General Zhang has heaven's blessing, and he is a natural god of war. How could he fall to a tiny Tianjin? Junju doesn't need to worry. Your brother will definitely return triumphantly." Zhang Ruan smiled. "Thank you, Fourth Highness, for your well wishes. It's just that her smile was a little forced." Shaking his head, Xianlang said, "Speaking of which, I heard from Imperial Father that the situation over there is really rather tense. Although Tianjin is a small nation, their smelting technology is superb. Their swords and shields are extraordinarily sharp and sophisticated, and they are cunning on the battlefield. It's really," he sighed. As soon as she heard his words, Zhang Ruan's face changed again, and she reluctantly said, "What Fourth Highness is implying is." Once he saw her uneasy expression, Xianlang became even more confident in himself. Seemingly unintentionally, he continued, "It would be good if General Wu could send troops." "General Wu?" Zhang Ruan wondered. "Junju probably doesn't understand the imperial court situation very well," Xianlang said. He explained considerately, "General Wu is a military general with good soldiers under his command, and the Wu family army is also very skilled. He used to guard Shirong, but ever since they surrendered a few years ago, the Wu family army retreated and haven't set out since then, causing General Wu to worry that his army's heroic skills will rust. If the Wu family army and General Wu can come out of obscurity to take charge, we need to only wait for the day that Tianjin is broken." Zhang Ruan lowered her eyes. General Wu, of course she knew of this General Wu. In her previous life, Xianli slowly nibbled away at his enemies after he ascended the throne. Just as he took every opportunity to suppress the Zhao family, he likewise kept promoting the Wu family. The Wu and Zhao families were both old heroes who conquered the country under the command of the previous emperor, but after the old General Wu died, the current General Wu was a stubborn and self-aggrandizing man who thought very highly of himself. He was so ambitious that he dreamed of occupying Great Jin's seat of power and spared no effort to snuff out the Zhao family. When she was imprisoned in her past life, she vaguely heard that the one who led people to arrest everyone in the Zhaofu was General Wu himself. She lowered her head, seemingly in thought, as Xianlang stared at her. Zhang Ruan looked up. "If it is as Fourth Highness says, then why don't my grandfather and uncles go as reinforcements? Would that not be more convenient? General Zhao's soldiers are guarding the capital's vital points. How can they simply leave?" Xianlang shook his head. Besides, with the relationship between Deputy General Jiang and General Zhao, Imperial Father probably wouldn't let the Zhao family send troops. This was to sow discord? Did he want to chill the relationship between the emperor and her brothers? A smile flickered past Zhang Ruan's lips, but her expression soon changed to an ignorant one. Then what should we do? No need to worry. Xianlang thought for a bit, then said, seemingly hesitant, my eighth brother has a good relationship with General Wu. If he could say a few words. Eighth prince. Zhang Ruan, stunned, anxiously asked him, should we ask eighth prince to persuade General Wu? Doesn't this still depend on imperial father's intentions in the end? Xianlang shook his head helplessly. Besides, the thing imperial father hates most is his sons getting too close to a minister. If eighth brother asks recklessly like that, it might provoke imperial father to have misgivings. Then what should we do? Zhang Ruan's tone carried some disappointment. Xianlang glanced at her, then suddenly shuffled closer. Junju. There is something I am unsure if I should say. You speak. Zhang Ruan looked at him. Actually, there is a way, Xianlang said. What way? Zhang Ruan, with her eyes lit up, couldn't wait to ask. The time has come for eighth brother to choose a consort, but imperial father holds some prejudices against him because of imperial consort Chan. When I asked him about it a few days ago, eighth brother said that he already had someone in his heart. He looked at Zhang Ruan, and only continued when he confirmed that she didn't show a sullen expression. It's not like there isn't any precedent if eighth brother and Junju get married. And if Junju mentioned sending reinforcements later, it would be natural for eighth brother, as your husband, to help by recommending General Wu to our imperial father. Me an eighth prince? Zhang Ruan asked. Xianlang nodded, then hesitantly continued, this isn't an ideal solution, but we don't have any other way. If Junju wants to save Deputy General Jiang, this is the fastest way. Eighth brother is infatuated with Junju. So I think you should be able to get along well. Marriage has always been dictated by our parents. How can I decide it so arbitrarily? Zhang Ruan asked. That's easy, Xianlang said. Eighth brother only needs to ask imperial father for a marriage edict. Zhang Ruan internally sneered. It was easy to talk about asking for a marriage edict, but in the end it still depended on Empress Dowager Ida. If she truly wasn't willing, the Empress Dowager wouldn't force her to marry. This was why Xianli would make Xianlang confirm with her first that she wouldn't refuse. She had been trying to figure out the motive behind Xianlang's long-winded rambling, but hadn't anticipated that their plans included her. Their calculated move was truly impressive. Marry her, then take the Zhao family under his wing. With the Jiang family already under his command, wouldn't Jiang Xinji then be just a fish on his chopping board? Even the matter of sending General Wu as reinforcements would take advantage of her situation. If they were victorious, wouldn't all the credit land on Xianli's head? There was no way for him to lose. Only, she still couldn't believe that Xianli truly wanted to send General Wu to help Jiang Xinji. It was likely that if Jiang Xinji showed even a hint that he wasn't willing to submit to Xianli, General Wu would not hesitate to stab him in the back. And even if Jiang Xinji didn't show anything, with General Wu's narrow-minded and jealous temperament, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't have wayward thoughts anyway when he met Jiang Xinji, who already had such outstanding military merits at such a young age. Xianlang thought his words were flawless, because Jiang Xinji was Zhang Ruan's weakness. This brother and sister pair had a good relationship, not to mention that Zhang Ruan was a woman, so it was easy for her to be affected by her emotions. As soon as Jiang Xinji was involved, she would become muddle-headed. It was just that he didn't hear Zhang Ruan's answer for a long time, so he felt a little anxious. When Zhang Ruan lifted her head, she didn't look nearly as flustered as Xianlang had expected. Instead, her expression was placid and cold to the extreme, and even revealed some ridicule. Under that gaze, there was no one who wouldn't flee in embarrassment. Junju, he began. Fourth Highness is very knowledgeable of current affairs, Zhang Ruan said with a shallow smile, instantly making Xianlang's expression transform. She looked at him with a smile that wasn't quite one. You are very suited to the court. His Majesty should really see this eloquence of Fourth Highness. Her manner of speech seemed to contain traces of smile, and yet at the same time she showed a sign of admiration, both of which caused Xianlang to break out into a cold sweat. Who was he? The most incompetent prince of Great Jin. Anyone could despise him because he was so incompetent, but in the end his position was also the safest. When several princes died in succession, he alone lived not because he was lucky, but because he was stupid. And even if he wasn't actually stupid, he had to pretend to be. In truth, although he was mediocre and not particularly outstanding, he wasn't actually as dumb or cowardly as everyone thought. However, unlike him, his other brothers who were so intelligent still fell to terrible outcomes. They all died the same in the end. The emperor knew he couldn't bear any great responsibilities, and the courtiers also knew that he didn't have the ability to. Therefore, he had never been involved in the whirling struggle for power. Yet despite being lowly, of all his brothers, he took a liking to Xianli. On the surface he was close to the crown prince, but he was actually Xianli's person. No matter how mediocre he was, no matter how many years he spent pretending to be an idiot, as someone from the imperial family, he still yearned for power as they all did. Although he knew he didn't have the qualifications to fight for the highest throne, it was also good to improve his position a bit. Xianli wore the mask of a gentleman, so how could Xianlang miss out? It's just that his mask wasn't as good as Xianli's. He was insignificant, weak, and as cowardly as a mouse. But like a snake hidden in the dark, he could give a fatal blow at the most critical time. He was the concealed sword Xianli wielded within the palace. But what did Zhang Ruan's words mean? If the emperor knew that he cared so much about affairs of the state, he would have to be an idiot not to realize that he'd been pretending to be stupid all along. That'd be bad. If anything happened, not even Xianli would let him go easily. Xianlang forced out a smile. Junju, I am not so knowledgeable. You're too humble, Zhang Ruan said in a relaxed tone. Fourth Highness is clearly wise and magnanimous. If the crown prince were to know that there is such a smart person by his side, then even the grand tutor would be superfluous. She watched the panicking Xianlang with a smile. Perhaps Fifth Highness will also be pleased to know that his brother is so talented. Just listen to her relaxed tone with barely a trace of the previous panic. Xianlang would be a true idiot if he still didn't realize that Zhang Ruan had played him like a fiddle. This woman not only lied to him, but she wasn't worrying about Zhang Xing at all. Zhang Ruan looked at him all smiles as a soft breeze slightly lifted her skirts. Her eyes were as lustrous as a clear spring, yet they also held something else within their depths. A chill swept through his body and left ice in his veins until not a trace of warmth was left. Xianlang asked with some difficulty, June, are you unwilling to marry eighth brother because you already have someone in your heart? Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. What on earth are you talking about? Xianlang was dumbfounded. Tianzhu didn't move, Lu Zhu looked serious, and Zhang Ruan simply gazed at him. She knew that every word spoken today would inevitably reach that person's ears. Since he, Xianli, had personally directed and put on such a show for her, she might as well let him enjoy it for a little while longer. This subterfuge, who couldn't do it? My elder brother is fighting so bravely on the front lines, so how can I bear to marry at this time? And even if I must marry, it should be to an upright man. Great Jean hasn't fallen to the point that it needs to be protected by its daughters. How can your eighth brother not know this when even I know? Then say I ask His Majesty to send reinforcements. If not even the many ministers of the court dare to speak on this matter, then what guarantee do I have that I am not just handing over my life? Someone who doesn't have the courage to protect the country. Will the day come that they also don't dare to protect me? I want to marry a man, not a coward. Zhang Ruan smiled. Her words pressed Xianlang into speechlessness and made him drip more cold sweat. It was impossible for Xianli to not be angry when he heard about this conversation. Who else would this anger be vented on if not Xianlang himself? Juanju's words are too heavy, Xianlang said. Eighth brother is also helpless. It looks like the relationship between Fourth Highness and Eighth Highness is very good. Then Zhang Ruan said in a light tone, go back and tell your master. Those wishful thoughts of his can only happen in his dreams. Chapter 145 Xiao Xiao proposes marriage. Chapter 145. Xiao Xiao proposes marriage. A perfectly fine conversation ended unhappily. Xianlang's face was pale when he left, like he could no longer withstand Zhang Ruan's scrutiny, and his hasty exit was like a person fleeing the scene. When he arrived at that man's residence, it went as expected. Although his expression had no cracks, the corners of his smile were stiff. After an unknown period of time, the man lifted his cup and took a long sip of tea. With an expression as cold as ice, he said, "I originally wanted to take care of her, but since she doesn't know good from bad, I have no need to hesitate." A cruel light flashed in his eyes. "Close the net." The capital on this evening was no different from any other. Although the sun set earlier during autumn and plunged the city into darkness, Jining Wangfu was brightly lit. Xiao Xiao sat upon an elevated seat, his usually expressionless face carrying a few hints of callousness. Yifeng, Jini, and Jinxi stood next to him as Xiao Xiao burned the letter in his hands. The jumping sparks of fire reflected in his dark eyes, giving them the appearance of obsidian. "Fourth brother Qi's news has never been wrong," he said lightly. "Xianli has made a move. Eighth prince is acting too bold. This deal is fraught with treachery, and yet he appears unconcerned that he'll be inviting wolves into his house." Jinxi couldn't help her contempt as she spoke. He was a son of Great Jin's royal family, yet his actions couldn't compare to beasts. He treated the thousands of people on the border as a trifling matter, just to satisfy his own ambition and selfishness. Such a person would be despised wherever they went. Zuguburu. Worse than a dog or pig / lower than low. "The news will reach the imperial court tomorrow morning." Xiao Xiao didn't respond to Jinxi's words, but instead tapped the table. "This is a matter of grave importance. If it is as fourth brother Qi says, Lao Guan is also in danger." Lao. Prefix used before the surname of a person or a numeral indicating the order of birth of the children in a family, or to indicate affection or familiarity / old of people / venerable person. "General Guan?" Genie frowned. "Master, perhaps we should remind young Master Emo that if eighth prince does this, the crown prince may also be in danger. You make a trip to Emotsong's residence." Xiao Xiao stood and picked up his robe. "I'm going to the palace." After Zhang Ruan woke early the next day, Lian Xiao and Baiji helped her get ready for the day. Since it was getting colder, Baiji chose a long robe made with octagonal pattern brocade for Zhang Ruan. The air in the courtyard was relaxed and comfortable after breakfast, and so Lian Xiao moved a chair outside for Zhang Ruan to flip through a few books while she and Baiji took advantage of the good weather to lay out the old books stored in the box. Octagonal pattern brocade, probably supposed to be a brocade design from the Tang or Song dynasty comprising of repeating octagons and squares. On this day, what was usually a mundane and routine set of actions had strangely become peculiar. Furthermore, the gazes of the maids in the yard as they looked at Zhang Ruan were a little different. Normally, the servants bestowed by Empress Dowager Ida were well behaved, but today their gazes held a sense of scrutiny. They weren't very good at covering up their actions, so Zhang Ruan clearly noticed, but she just quietly carried on with her own affairs. Although Zhang Ruan could endure it, Baiji and Lian Xiao could not. Just as they were about to ask one of the palace maids what was going on, they saw Lu Zhu hurrying over with an anxious expression. Lu Zhu, looking very nervous, said to Zhang Ruan, "Miss, this servant has something to report." Baiji understood. She waved the maids away, supported Zhang Ruan back into her room, and closed the door. Without waiting for Zhang Ruan to ask, Lu Zhu said, "Miss, there's been news from the front lines. There was a skirmish with Tianjin and Great Jin's army fell into an ambush. 100,000 soldiers all perished. Now there are only 30,000 soldiers left, and General Guan is critically injured. An eldest young master." She glanced at Zhang Ruan in worry. "Eldest young master is missing in action. He may have been captured by Tianjin." Zhang Ruan's hands couldn't help but tense, while the expressions on Baiji and Lian Xiao's faces also changed. The emperor was probably furious that the outcome of the war had fallen into uncertainty like this. For someone to go missing on the battlefield, they had either perished or had been captured alive by the enemy. Either way, these were the only two outcomes. Moreover, if they had defected to the enemy, their whole family would be implicated and treated as traitors to the throne. A person like Zhang Xianji would never defect, so he would only receive torture or death. Since this news was passed to the imperial court, then more likely than not it was true. Zhang Ruan's worst fears had come true. With her expression sinking like water, she gripped the armrest as her lips slowly paled. Mississippi. Lu Zhu held Zhang Ruan's hand in distress. Zhang Ruan and Zhang Xing relied on each other so much. The feelings between them were obvious to all. If there were anything in the world that could move Zhang Ruan, then Zhang Xing would be ranked at the top. Now his life and death were uncertain and his fate unclear. Yet Zhang Ruan didn't shed a single tear. "Miss, you can cry if you want, otherwise you yourself will suffer," Lu Zhu said. Zhang Ruan, lowering her gaze, slowly took back her hand. She'd cried so many times in her previous life and had still met such a tragic ending. She hadn't yet completed her revenge in this life, so what gave her the qualifications to cry right now? Her lips gradually rose into a shockingly cruel smile, like a flower of evil blooming in hell piercing into the bones. Since that is the case, there is no need to wait any longer. In the Golden Throne Hall, two groups of courtiers were quarreling. One side was insisting on punishing Zhang Xing and Guanliang Han for leading troops poorly, while the other insisted that they shouldn't unduly interfere with generals on campaign, so as not to impact the soldiers' morale. Zhang Xing was a new upstart while Guanliang Han was headstrong, so not many people were willing to speak up for either of them except for a few pure and honest officials. As for those who wished for them to be punished, they were naturally the ones who couldn't stand to see someone else get ahead, people who had other plans, or people who casually gave others a kick when they were down. The emperor watched with cold eyes as the two factions fought until their faces turned red. No matter how they argued, they didn't notice the expression on the man sitting on the dragon throne. After a while, the emperor looked at Xian Li, who stood respectfully to the side. "Lao Eighth, tell Zhan what you think of this matter." Xian Li took a step forward and saluted. "To answer Imperial Father, in your son's opinion, General Guan and Deputy General Zhang's actions were all to protect the people of our great Jin. At present, things are unclear, so we should not act hastily. Why don't we wait a while longer and get to the bottom of things?" "Eighth Highness," Zhao Guang said, "the battlefield is not a game. Your Highness can afford to wait, but the soldiers cannot. I'm afraid that when everything becomes clear, the war will already be settled, and it will be difficult to do anything else." Zhao Guang had always been neutral in the court, never specifically targeting anyone. It was only when his nephew fell into mortal danger that he confronted Xian Li so impolitely, in front of all the courtiers of the dynasty. When this move fell into the eyes of people with hidden agendas, it brought another round of speculation. Upon looking at Zhao Guang's stance and attitude, did it mean that the court's superficial peace was about to be torn away, and the struggle for that seat was going to start in earnest? "General Zhao's words are improper," Duke Chun rebuked. Ever since Imperial Consort Chun was banished to the Cold Palace, Duke Chen's Fu had been very restrained in their actions. However, today, since they had unexpectedly jumped into the fray in such a manner, this demonstrated that they were prepared to deal with Zhang Xing once and for all. He continued, "Any captured deputy general who still has any integrity should take his sword to his own neck. Otherwise, how can they lower themselves and endure humiliation merely to save their own life? And if he were to leak military secrets, would that not bring disaster?" Emotsong shook his head. "Although Duke Chen's reasoning is sound, you should also remember that there was a general in the previous dynasty who falsely surrendered when he was captured, then spent the next 10 years spying on the enemy country, assisted in a great victory, then returned triumphantly. Can our great Jin not have such a person?" Emotsong had always been good at debating, and Duke Chen's complexion soon went through a series of changes when he saw the emperor's attitude show signs of wavering. He hurriedly interjected, "But if something happens, who will take responsibility? We must not speak arbitrarily," Lu Min, who had thus far been silent, said. "Duke Chun claimed that Deputy General Zhang has defected, so please provide your evidence. Otherwise, slander like this would be insulting to any commanding general." Although Lu Min was the imperial grand tutor, the emperor favored him highly for his upright nature, and listened to his opinions on many court matters. No one thought that this imperial grand tutor Lu would blatantly take Zhang Xing's side. Duke Chen's face became even more unsightly, while Xianli closely scrutinized Lu Min. The emperor swept a glance over his courtiers, then asked Xianhua Lao Fifth, "What do you think? This matter is too important. Your son dares not recklessly make a decision." His answer was watertight. Imperial father is wise in all things. Mingchikiho, lit. Seeing clearly the downy feathers of autumn/figure perceptive of even the finest detail. The emperor let out a bark of laughter, but this laugh shocked everyone present in the court. Seeing as the two factions were about to fight again, the emperor gravely declared, "Since you can't decide, you don't have to decide anymore." The officials looked at each other in dismay, not understanding the emperor's thoughts. The emperor stood up. Eunuch Li hurriedly went up to support him, then announced in a shrill voice, "His Majesty is unwell, court is dismissed." After the emperor left, Xianhua approached Xianli and said, staring at him, "Eighth brother moves fast. Fifth brother isn't slow either." Xianli replied gently, "No different from a gentleman." Xianhua slowly clenched his fists, then took a deep breath. "Eighth brother wants the military power of those 100,000 troops, but you might be thinking too complacently." Xianli shook his head. "It's worth all the hard work. As long as it's successful." He left without turning back. When he passed Lu Min, he gave him a significant look. Emotsong walked up to Lu Min and patted his shoulder. "You've really offended 8th Prince today." "Huh." Lu Min was a bit confused. Emotsong kindly explained to him, "As you know, Duke Chen is 8th Prince's maternal grandfather, so they're definitely on the same side. By refuting Duke Chen, you've refuted 8th Prince. For the sake of once being classmates, I advise you to be a bit more vigilant going forward." Although, Emotsong looked Lu Min up and down, "You're also acting strangely. Why did you suddenly speak up for Deputy General Jiang?" Although Lu Min was upright and honest, he wasn't reckless. One only needed to look at the fact that he was from a poor family yet could sit firmly as imperial grand tutor, and be trusted by the emperor to know that he was well versed in officialdom, and could keep a balance between preserving his kindness and not being pitted by others because he was too forthright. In regards to today's events, even if he only meant to advise, based on Lu Min's usual manner, he would not have ripped off Duke Chen's face in front of all the court officials and ministers like this. This was indeed a rare occurrence. In addition, Jiang Xing was a military man, while Lu Min was a scholar. Typically, they wouldn't get within 6 feet of each other. Thus, when Xianli looked at Lu Min earlier, he seemed to have another meaning. Could something have happened that I don't know about? As Emotsong pondered, Lu Min suddenly flinched, as if his words suddenly reminded him of something, and he gave him a hurried bow. "I still have something to do. Thank you for the reminder, Emodaran." Then he hastily walked away with a flick of his sleeves. Lu Min left just like that before Emotsong could finish, making him feel stifled. Then he suddenly thought of something and took a look around, but he didn't see that person. He muttered to himself, "That's strange. For such a big thing, third brother Xiao didn't come to court. Where'd he go?" The third brother Xiao whom Emotsong mentioned was currently in Xianing Palace. Empress Dowager Ida was clearly stunned when she saw Xiao Xiao. She suddenly stood up from the soft couch, making Yonggugu rush forward to help, then took 2 steps forward and reached out as if wanting to touch Xiao Xiao. However, she soon retracted her hand, looking unsure of herself. Any outsiders who saw this would definitely be shocked that the resolute and eternally calm Empress Dowager Ida could show such an expression. "A beloved Minister Xiao," Empress Dowager Ida said in a faintly trembling voice, "You came to meet Ijia, what's the matter?" In contrast, Xiao Xiao was indifferent, even colder than usual. "This official has a request." "Speak," Empress Dowager Ida said. "Ijia will do everything in her power to accomplish it." At this humble, even flattering attitude, Yonggugu lowered her head, but Xiao Xiao's face didn't change at all, only moving the hand hanging by his side slightly. It was only after a long silence that he said, "May Empress Dowager grant this official a marriage." "A marriage?" This time Empress Dowager Ida cried out in surprise, not knowing whether she was more joyful or shocked. She asked in a high tone, "You have a sweetheart? Which family's young lady is she?" Yonggugu silently patted Empress Dowager Ida's hand, causing her to pause and sit back on the couch. Her long nail guards, embedded with rubies, swept uneasily across the edge of the couch. However, her gaze towards Xiao Xiao was unerringly soft. "Which family do you want Aijia to ask for you?" Xiao Xiao gently lowered his eyes, shifted his body, and slowly knelt on one knee. This was a court official's salute to a ruler. With a calm voice devoid of ripples, yet carrying a hint of softness that even he himself didn't detect, he said, "Hong and Junju, the Jiang family's eldest daughter, Miss Ruan." Ruan. If Xiao Xiao taking the initiative to request a marriage decree from Empress Dowager Ida was surprising, then hearing the person he wished to marry stunned her. She froze in place, and only reacted to Xiao Xiao's kneeling form after a long time. "You get up quickly. Ruaner, how did you think of marrying Ruaner?" Xiao Xiao stood. He didn't hide anything when he narrated indifferently. Hong and Junju once granted this official a life-saving grace. Today, the situation at the border area is tense. The whereabouts of Deputy General Jiang are unknown, and Hong and Junju's status is awkward. Both the palace and her family are full of deep scheming. If this official marries her, then Jinying Wangfu can give her at least some protection. He said it so frankly that it was hard for anyone to doubt it. In addition, Xiao Xiao didn't usually lie, so Empress Dowager Ida completely believed him even though she didn't know what was the life-saving grace he talked about. However, she still felt it a little absurd, so she snorted under her breath. "Preposterous is marriage child's play? This isn't how you should repay a debt of gratitude. Aijia knows you're a person who highly values personal loyalty and thus want to protect her. Nonetheless, Hongan is my granddaughter. So as long as she is within the palace, why isn't it possible to shield and protect her?" "The inner palace isn't allowed to participate in politics," Xiao Xiao said blandly. "There are some things that Empress Dowager cannot do. The emperor has already started suppressing Hong and Junju." He paused, then added, "This official is set on marrying eldest Miss Jiang." When these words came out, even Yang Gugu, who spent many years struggling in the palace without a change in expression, widened her eyes in shock. Yang Gugu thought for a while, then said, "This servant doesn't think Xiao Wangya was pretending earlier when he talked about his feelings towards Junju. He truly loves Hongan." Empress Dowager Ida let out a deeper sigh. "This is what Aijia worries about. Hongan's personality might actually be colder than his. She looks gentle, but she actually doesn't care about anything. If A Xiao can't move her heart, it would be useless for Aijia to pair them together." Empress Dowager Ida frowned. Besides, the emperor has already chosen a match for him, the daughter of Binhai Province's Governor Yao. She is proficient in both literary and martial arts, so much so that she could rival most men, and she is also beautiful. Aijia knows exactly what the emperor is thinking. Aijia is afraid that after Aijia bestows their marriage, the emperor will go find trouble with Hongan. She hesitated a moment. The Jiang family is also a big problem. Aijia feels that after A Xiao marries Hongan, things will be much more difficult in the future. Yang Gugu smiled and rubbed Empress Dowager Ida's shoulders as she consoled. "Empress Dowager doesn't need to think so hard. Xiao Wangya is extraordinary, and Hongan Junju is also a clever person. They won't easily fall prey to their tricks. Since Xiao Wangya likes Hongan Junju, she must have something special. Besides, Xiao Wangya is the most eligible bachelor of Great Jin. How can Junju not like him? Our lives will get better day by day, so Empress Dowager can rest assured." Empress Dowager Ida's furrowed brows slowly loosened at Yang Gugu's pleasant words, and as if something suddenly came to mind, a smile gradually emerged at the corners of her mouth. "You're right, our lives will get better." Aijia was the one who got confused. "Aijia will call Hongan here in the next few days and discuss this matter properly." Chapter 146. A graceful lady, the perfect match for a gentleman. Chapter 146. A graceful lady, the perfect match for a gentleman. Jiang Ruan was completely unaware of what had transpired in the Xianing Palace. Nonetheless, everything in the world had its own destiny and coincidences were commonplace, and so someone else also had the same idea as Xiao Xiao. In the Commander-in-Chief Fu, Gui sent a manservant away. He was about to sneak out of the fu himself, and had just reached the courtyard's gate when he heard a familiar voice. Where are you going? Deflated, Gui looked back sheepishly. Sure enough, Gu Foreign was behind him. She took a few steps forward and reprimanded him. Where do you expect to go now that things are so chaotic outside? Gui rolled his eyes a few times and came up with an idea. I want to go to the palace and see my Biaojia. Biaojia. Older female cousin via female line. Gui's Biaojia was also a talented woman in the palace. The two cousins had previously been on good terms, but since she had entered the palace Gui hadn't seen her in a long time. Gu Foreign raised her brows, thinking that this reason was a little far-fetched. Oh, going to meet your Biaojia? Aren't you really trying to meet Hung and Junju? Mother, Gui was worried. Regardless of what happens, she and I are friends. I can't overlook the fact that she's now in a difficult situation. I am merely attempting to show concern for her. Gu Foreign looked at him vexedly, hating iron for not becoming steel. Show your concern for her? We're now at the height of the storm. Don't court death. Even if you do, don't implicate the whole fu. Jiang Xing's situation is uncertain. Be cautious, don't let others pull you into trouble. Our fu is innocent. We can't get caught up in these things for no reason. Henti Buchingang. Lit. Disappointed that iron does not turn into steel/figure, frustrated with somebody who has failed to meet one's expectations. All I want to do is comfort her. It's not as complicated as you think. Gui said anxiously. Mother, I can't be a villain who sees which way the wind blows, and then changes course. Gu Foreign let out a sigh and looked at her obstinate son, unsure whether to be happy or sad. Her son had matured and developed his own ideas, but Gu Foreign was fully aware of Gui's thought, that he'd always had Zhang Ruan in his heart. She assumed it was just a passing fancy during childhood, but he still hadn't given up on it after all these years, which may not be a good thing for Gui. Gui was delighted to see Gu Foreign's expression softening and immediately curried favor. Mother, my aunt and I are going to deliver some items to my Biaojia. I'll be back soon. Gu Foreign remained silent, indicating her tacit approval. Gui hurriedly instructed the manservant to get the horse ready, then turned around and left the courtyard. The Momo next to Gu Foreign asked, Foreign, are you going to let young master leave like this? Hung and Junju is a wise person, Gu Foreign said indifferently. I let him go so that he can put an end to his thoughts. Meanwhile, at the Lord Mayor Fu, a maidservant brought a small goblet of stewed snow pear soup. The sweet soup was boiled to a thick consistency and looked appetizing when served in a glittering and translucent crystal goblet. The maidservant set aside the sweet soup and extended her hand to assist a figure curled up on the soft couch. Miss, please get up and drink some sweet soup. Snow pear soup. No. With a strong nasal sound and a sob, a feeble voice sounded. The maidservant persuaded the young lady despite her discomfiture. Miss, don't worry too much. The situation hasn't come to light yet, and it might not get much worse. Why jeopardize your health? This remark seemed to remind the person curled up on the couch of her loss, and her shoulders shook as she cried even more. She sat up slowly after a while, revealing a haggard and pallid face. This young lady was Dong Yinger. Dong Yinger was dressed in a bisque-colored jacket. Her hair was combed in a simple bun and the remainder of her hair draped messily at the back of her head. Her once agile and lovely beauty was no longer there. She was at the peak of her youth, but at present she appeared rather lifeless with an elderly demeanor. Her eyes were puffy from being soaked in tears for a long time, and the hair that had fallen on both cheeks was clumpy and damp with tears. And yet, her appearance did not make one feel any pity. She licked her chapped lips and asked, "What time is it now?" Outside. Dong Darren and Dong Foreign were deeply worried. Dong Darren put his teacup on the table and sighed heavily. Yinger has no other choice now that it's over. Dong Foreign's gaze was unusually firm. Yinger must have no connection at all with Jiang Xing. It would be great if Yinger could give up her idea now that this has occurred. Foreign, Dong Darren shook his head. Yinger appears gentle on the outside, but she's actually quite headstrong. I'm afraid she will do something stupid. You don't know our daughter as well as I do. Dong Foren expressed her thoughts. It's better to suffer for a short time than having a prolonged agony. It's better to suffer a broken heart than to spend one's entire life pursuing the unachievable. Besides, you know best what's going on in the Fu. There is now only one path forward. She took a firm stance as though determined. I'll go in and persuade her. Dong Yinger sat on the couch like a lifeless clay doll. Dong Foren's heart ached as she entered the room and saw this scene. She waved the maidservant away and sat on the couch, calling out gently, Yinger. Dong Yinger responded after what seemed like an eternity. She turned towards Dong Foren, whose face was very close to hers, and gazed into her loving eyes. All kinds of emotions welled up in her heart at that time. She couldn't talk after calling out mother, so she leaned on Dong Foren and sobbed bitterly. Who could have imagined the shock and anguish she felt when she learned that the border had been declared a state of emergency and Jiang Xing had been defeated and captured? If she wasn't a boudoir daughter, she might take a trip to the border herself to see what it was like. Dong Yinger was in excruciating pain at the thought of such a brilliant and heroic deputy general, a charming and handsome man, becoming a lump of yellow soil on the battlefield like countless other soldiers. Pity the bones littering the banks of the Wuding River. They were the very people dreamt of in ladies' bedchambers. She had not shown her real feelings to him, and he was unaware of her affection, and now just like that they were separated forever. She suffered for Jiang Xing and was confined inside the Fu, but it was all for naught. The saddest thing in the world was that it ended before it could begin. T/N. Poem by Chan Tao, poet of the late Tang Dynasty. Translation link. Dong Yinger was obsessed with Jiang Xing. Therefore, now that Jiang Xing had ended up like this, how could she not fall apart? Dong Foren cradled Dong Yinger in her arms and soothed her in the same way she had before. It's not your fault. It's just the will of heaven. Don't jeopardize your health now that Deputy General Jiang has come to this end. Your elder brother, mother, and father all love you dearly. Mother will be upset if you are hurt. Seeing you in pain, mother's heart breaks. Mother, Dong Yinger sobbed, my heart is in so much pain. Mother understands your heartache. Dong Foren held Dong Yinger tighter. How can I not feel pain? You only know that Deputy General Jiang was defeated, but the Imperial Court's forces are becoming increasingly complicated. Our family was meant to be impartial, but following Deputy General Jiang's defeat, the way things were handled in public turned our family into chestnuts in the fire, with everyone wanting a peace. Now your father and elder brother can neither advance or retreat, as one negligent step will cost us everything. Why is only our family being burnt in the fire? She stroked Dong Yinger's long hair. If Deputy General Jiang died in battle, it was a well-deserved death, as generals give their lives on the battlefields. What we're most terrified about is that he died in a muddled manner. Dong Foren's voice sounded tired and worried. Dong Yinger raised her head. She remained confined to the house these days, and she largely ignored Dong Darren and Dong Foren, as well as what was going on in the Fu. How did it come to be that while she was oblivious to all things, the Fu had fallen into such a perilous predicament? She quickly turned to face Dong Foren. With this glance she noticed something she hadn't realized before. The previously plump Dong Foren had lost a lot of weight, her brows were filled with sadness, and she appeared haggard. Mother, what has happened? Dong Yinger inquired, surprised. It has nothing to do with you. Dong Foren stroked her hair and smiled. As long as you're well, mother will be content. Dong Yinger was not convinced. What Dong Foren had just said had sunk deep into her heart. She was originally in love with Jiang Xing, but whether Jiang Xing was captured or killed in the war, it was now impossible for her to be with him in this life. Furthermore, there was no going back now that her engagement with the Chong family had been broken off. In any case, there was nothing left to live for. She had believed that death was the only way to escape her heartache, but when she saw Dong Foren, she changed her mind. The only people in the world who would always be there for her and treat her well was her own family. For Jiang Xing, she had disobeyed her parents. Given that she had no other desires in this life now, why not fulfill their wish? Mother, I will enter the palace, she said, looking at Dong Foren. You. Dong Foran was stunned for a moment before forcing a smile. You should get some rest now. After everything that has happened, it is time to focus on getting well first and not thinking about anything else. Mother. Dong Yinger smiled softly. Something seemed to evaporate from her playful gaze in that single second, replaced with a hint of ice. Since the Fu is experiencing difficulties, elder brother and father must get a foothold in the court. If they are not careful, mistakes will be purposefully discovered for punishment. When I enter the palace, I can seek His Majesty's protection or at the very least change His Majesty's attitude toward our Dong family. She abruptly rose from her seat, knelt before Dong Foran, and humbly kowtowed 3 times. Daughter has been disobedient. It was my fault for abandoning Dong Fu for my selfish reasons. Please, mother, allow me the opportunity to make amends. Please allow me to enter the palace. Her tone was adamant as if she no longer had a yearning for Jiang Xing, and even her grief quickly vanished as if she had never fallen in love with a deputy general named Jiang Xing. Dong Foran couldn't tell if she was happy or sad when she looked at her. All her emotions turned into a long sigh. Jiang Xing eventually transformed Dong Yinger into someone completely different, and Dong Yinger's life was rewritten. Her playful and unconstrained youth was now over. Dong Yinger would enter the deep palace and, in the cage entwined with intrigue and power, seek fleeting glory for herself and her family one step at a time. Dong Darren approached Dong Foran as she was leaving Dong Yinger's room and asked, Foran, how's it going? Dong Foran stood silently in front of the Guanyin statue in the hall, slowly closing her eyes. With her hands folded together, a tear quickly spilt out and fell into the incense ash stove. She could only spend the rest of her life atoning for her sins. The only wish she had was for Dong Yinger to be safe and happy in this life, even if it was an unreasonable wish. Jiang Ruan looked up and her gaze shifted to the young man in front of her, as they stood in the garden outside the Gongzhu Hall. Gui wore a long robe of aqua-green sky brocade, with large auspicious clouds embroidered on his chest. His black eyes were fixed on Jiang Ruan somewhat nervously. In a trance, she seemed to have returned to the Linglong boat from a few years ago where they had first met. The youth was the favored child of a rich and noble family. To him, life was like the brightly colored and magnificent peonies in this garden, which drew people's attention and made them stop to appreciate them. She had only spoken casually at the time, but things had changed since then. The youth had matured into a young man, yet his eyes appeared to be more sincere than before. His levity had faded a little and he had become more composed, but the way he was gazing at her remained the same. Jiang Ruan nodded. Young Master Gu. She could smile sweetly at those who were malicious, but she could only treat this persistent admirer with coldness. Miss Jiang. Gui could never address her as Hong'an Junju. In his heart, Jiang Ruan was still the Jiang family's Ruan Yang when Gui first met her. He was awestruck by her beauty. She was a graceful lady who was the perfect match for a gentleman. Jiang Ruan later accompanied Empress Dowager to the Imperial Ancestral Temple, and when she reappeared 3 years later it was in full glory and splendor, as if a dusty rough jade had finally been unearthed. People found it increasingly difficult to turn away now that she had been carved into an elaborate work of art. Despite the fact that he was a young master from the Commander-in-Chief Fu, he should exercise caution in his words and actions. Jiang Ruan was now Hong'an Junju, a person who was difficult to meet. Furthermore, Gu Darren had explicitly forbidden him from approaching Jiang Ruan. However, when the news of Jiang Xing's defeat arrived, Gui couldn't stand it anymore. In his opinion, the outcome of a defeated deputy general in the imperial court was obvious. Jiang Ruan was in the palace and would be inadvertently pushed to the forefront of the storm. The longer she stayed in the palace, the more dangerous it would be. It was inevitable that she would be implicated by Jiang Xing. Gui said, Miss Jiang, please set your mind at rest about your elder brother's situation. Thank you for your consolation, Jiang Ruan answered lightly. Seeing Jiang Ruan's attitude, Gui was a little nervous, but as he considered what to say next, he was full of courage. Miss Jiang, now that Deputy General Jiang's life and death are uncertain, being in the palace is too risky for you. The situation at the imperial court is chaotic, and since Miss Jiang and Deputy General Jiang are siblings, someone will undoubtedly implicate you as a result of Deputy General Jiang's incident. This is something that even Empress Dowager cannot account for. I have a plan. Zhang Ruan's brows were raised and her lips curved up. Oh, what plan does young Master Gu have? Gu Yi's pulse raced a little quicker as she looked at him. He responded after a little pause. As long as Miss Jiang gets engaged quickly, you will have nothing to do with the Jiang Fu. If someone wants to take advantage of Deputy General Jiang's situation in the future, Miss Jiang is not of the Jiang Fu. Because you will not be held responsible for this, you should be able to escape unscathed. Young Master Gu makes an excellent point. Zhang Ruan let out a sigh. But who would be willing to become engaged with me at this time? She asked, smiling. It's too late to escape now. Me, Gui blurted out. When he saw Zhang Ruan's expression, he hesitated for a moment before summoning the courage to speak. I have admired Miss Jiang for a long time. The Commander-in-Chief Fu can't be stirred by villains. If Miss Jiang is willing to be engaged to me, I will take good care of you and won't let you be wronged. With the support of the Commander-in-Chief Fu, Miss Jiang will never be troubled by false charges. Zhang Ruan smiled as she looked at the young man in front of her. The man's eyes were filled with hope, and his feelings were intense. Even with the title Temptress haunting her in her previous life, she had never seen such an ardent gaze. It was a pity that Gui met her in this life, and even such a sincere and heartfelt confession could not move her in the slightest. She lowered her gaze. I only have one question for young Master Gu. What did Gu Darren think of it? Gui froze. What did his father think of it? His father warned him to stop pining and not set the Commander-in-Chief Fu on fire over a woman. I will convince my father, he said, looking at Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan shook her head. Gu Darren will not be persuaded by you. Her tone was gentle. Thank you for your kindness, young Master Gu. I'm aware of my awkward situation. How can I marry into the Commander-in-Chief Fu? I'm afraid that not only Gu Darren but also Gu Furen will not approve of it. Marrying against the wishes of the family will result in an unhappy union. This kindness that young Master Gu has given me, I will cherish for the rest of my life. However, should you insist on furthering the kind of intentions that would change the status of our current relationship, then let it be known that this is something that I do not desire. Miss Jiang. Gui was anxious. Young Master Gu, Zhang Ruan interjected. Young Master Gu is no longer an adolescent. Everything has a cost. Is making the Commander-in-Chief Fu pay such a high price for me really worth it? You should know that if you marry me, the Commander-in-Chief Fu will be constantly targeted. The Commander-in-Chief's career will be blocked after advancing to the current position due to a choice made by young Master Gu, while Gu Furen will be concerned. Is it really worth it just for a woman, young Master Gu? Zhang Ruan's words rendered Gu Yi speechless. His formerly self-assured thinking couldn't help but hesitate. Was it really worth it to put the Commander-in-Chief Fu in such a situation for the sake of a Zhang Ruan? Zhang Ruan took a step back and smiled as she spoke. Ruan Yang expresses gratitude to young Master Gu for his remarks here today. Ruan Yang will remember such a precious thought. We will still be friends if we meet again in the future. In this life, however, we do not have the fate of companionship. Gu Yi's mouth felt numb and bitter. He was aggrieved. The beautiful woman was close at hand, but the fact was they were separated by 1,000 high mountains and 10,000 streams, and it was impossible to be together in this life. Although Gu Yi was impulsive, he had a strong awareness of the merits and drawbacks of this situation. He might not listen if others said this to him, but since this was Zhang Ruan, his beloved, his heart gradually calmed down. He let out a bitter laugh. I understand. Do you think it's possible for us to have a fate together if you're not the Junju and I'm not the young master of the Commander-in-Chief Fu? There is no such thing as if in the world. Zhang Ruan smiled. Gu Yi took 2 steps back, his face filled with undisguised sadness. There is no such thing as if. He shook his head as if he had suddenly matured. His eyes held the entanglement that would cause others to feel a tug in their hearts. He shook his head and walked away. He came to a halt after 2 steps and said, I only have one question. Miss Jiang, have you ever had feelings for me?
No.
Jiang Ruan smiled in response. Gu Yi's body swayed twice. He paused for a moment before striding away. Seeing Gu Yi's back disappear, Jiang Ruan lowered her gaze and turned to go back to the princess palace. When she turned around, she saw a young man dressed in black with a cold and threatening air looking at her quietly from beneath the osmanthus tree. It was unknown how long he'd been standing there. Chapter 147 Angst. Chapter 147 Angst. Jiang Ruan was slightly startled. Then she walked toward Xiao Xiao. Why are you here? Would you really agree to marry him if you were on equal footing? Rather than responding, Xiao Xiao asked an irrelevant question. Yes. Jiang Ruan responded. Why not marry into the Gu family if you can get protection while still carrying out your plan? It's just that the Gu family is powerless to defend themselves at present, and it's not the best option. Xiao Xiao looked down at her, and a certain emotion flashed in his eyes. Would you marry if there is someone worthy of you? Why not? Jiang Ruan asked in reply. Xiao Xiao gave her a long look. Just as Jiang Ruan thought that he would remain silent, he asked, Then what do you think of me? Jiang Ruan was stunned. Xiao Xiao said, Jining Wangfu is directly under the emperor, so there is no need to be concerned about established factions. Its power is strong enough to keep you safe. There are no in-laws at the top, and there are no obnoxious servants at the bottom. No one will dare to bully you once you enter the Wangfu as its mistress. Instead, everyone will respect you. Can this family be regarded as satisfactory? He was serious when he spoke. He was dressed in black, and as cold and silent as the black gold auspicious beast Qilin standing at Jining Wangfu's gate in autumn. When he looked at people, his eyes were as deep as the stars that glittered brightly. His eyes were like the Milky Way in the ninth heaven, drowning people in the vast starry sky. Such a young man asked, Is it satisfactory? At that moment, the man who was the boudoir spring dream of the great Jin's countless daughters questioned her in a serious tone. How could she not be distracted? Jiang Ruan was silent for a time before continuing. So you're interested in marrying me? Why? You know the situation in the palace, Xiao Xiao replied nonchalantly. Staying in Jining Wangfu will certainly protect you. I'm not looking for protection, Jiang Ruan interrupted. Welcoming me into your Wangfu will provoke disaster. Xiao Xiao remained silent and inquired, What is your demand? What is my demand? Jiang Ruan repeated quietly. She raised her head abruptly and smiled. Her smile was seductive yet brimming with the kind of irony that could be etched deep into the bone marrow. He was plainly dressed entirely in umber black, yet it appeared as if he had stepped out of a sea of fire, his entire body seared in heat, as if willing to perish together with her. She pronounced each syllable clearly. I want those who owe me their lives to deliver their entire being to me. I want those who have looked down on me to always look up to me. When they see me, I want them to quiver. I want this beautiful land, all of its rivers and mountains, beneath me. Xiao Xiao fixed his gaze on the girl in front of him. It appeared to be the first time she had openly expressed her disdain and hostility. He had always suspected that Jiang Ruan harbored a secret, but now he realized that the secret was not as simple as he had imagined. Each word in her statement resounded like a sledgehammer, resounding with strength and vigor. What kind of fate could cause her to say such blatantly rebellious words? Yet it sounded so natural and matter-of-fact from her. Now you know who I am, the temptress who causes national calamity. I'll cause disaster wherever I go. You are the temptress who brings calamity to the nation, and I am a thief. His robe was as dark as the night sky, and his eyes were as cold as a star, but the words from his thin lips were scorching enough to burn people. We are made for each other. Jiang Ruan just stared at him blankly. You want vengeance and you want to kill everyone who has let you down. If this makes you happy, I can assist you. But you are not happy. Xiao Xiao's words drifted leisurely with the wind, but when they reached Jiang Ruan's ear, they made her heart ache. She was unhappy. How could she enjoy killing others? Indulging in vengeance would one day cause her to lose herself, and a heart blinded by hatred would eventually turn her into a vengeful machine. She raised her eyes to Xiao Xiao. The young man spoke in a confident and straightforward manner, and his eyes were as sharp as a knife. His words drew blood on the first prick and revealed the weakest part of her heart. Suddenly, a scene from the imperial throne room from her previous life flashed before her eyes. Jiang Quan stood by indifferently as she was deposed from her royal status, while Xianli declared that she was a temptress who brought the country to ruin. Her heart was pierced by a sharp pain. There was no turning back in hell, and there was no way out of the Yellow Springs. If this life was a divine providence to give her a chance to avenge herself, she would not hesitate to do so, even if it meant being burned in the end. Only it just so happened that she ran into him again in this life. She lowered her gaze and a bitter smile formed at the corners of her lips. I realized long ago, Xiao Xiao, that I have entered a nightmare. In the blink of an eye, her frail expression vanished. Her faint voice was tinged with inaudible despair and struggle. However, I can't wake up. Zhao Jin put the secret letter back in its original place. As she left quietly, she ran into her eldest brother, who had just returned from martial arts practice. Zhao Qian turned to look at his younger sister and asked, "Why did you come out of father's study, Mimi? I assumed father has yet to return." I can't seem to find my handkerchief. I went to the study to see if I misplaced it when I sent some pastries to father the other day." Zhao Jin stammered a little. Oh, Zhao Qian didn't doubt her and remarked jokingly, "You're a boudoir daughter, don't be rash and lose things all day. How can you find a good husband if you go on like this?" Zhao Jin scratched her ears impatiently. Eldest brother. A thought suddenly crossed her mind and she moved toward Zhao Qian. Eldest brother. Are you going to war with second brother and father? Zhao Qian's face changed and his tone turned grave. Where did you hear that? Why are you so fierce? Zhao Jin curled her lips and inadvertently said, Isn't there a state of emergency at the border? The conflict with Tianjin has become more intense. The emperor will undoubtedly dispatch reinforcements. The General Fu must avoid raising suspicions, and General Wu and General Guan are not on good terms with one another. So that only leaves us, and how can we, as a military leader Fu, evade this situation? Presumptuous. Are you allowed to guess the emperor's intentions? Zhao Qian scolded her, his face solemn. You must not say these things outside, or you will cause trouble for the Fu and end up in a mess. Eldest brother Zhao Jin, unfazed, took Zhao Qian's arm. I'm not going to tell anyone, and you're not an outsider. This is not to guess the emperor's intentions, but rather to show concern for national affairs. Please tell me, will you? If you all go to war, I'll be left alone in the Fu. It's so dull. Zhao Jin was the only little sister in the family. Her several brothers doted on her very much. She didn't take Zhao Qian's warning to heart when she said this. Zhao Qian was frustrated, but he adored his younger sister. Besides, Zhao Jin was fearless, so no matter what he said, she was not going to take it seriously. Zhao Qian finally caved in, unable to bear Zhao Jin's obstinate temper. You're too old to have fun all the time. When mother finds you a suitable marriage, you will become a wife in another family. You won't dare to be so disobedient at that point. I am indeed going to the border for reinforcement. Tianjin's army is extremely cunning, so it will be very dangerous. Perhaps father will leave after a few days. He glanced at Zhao Jin and said with concern, Don't get into any trouble when you're at home. I know. Zhao Jin rolled her eyes and probed him further. What is the situation there now? Has Deputy General Jiang really been captured as rumor has it? Is he to blame for this defeat? I'm afraid that's the case, His Majesty. Zhao Qian suddenly realized something. Seeing Zhao Jin's concern, he kept his mouth shut and shifted the subject. How come you're so concerned about this? This is a matter related to our family. As the proverb says, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Zhao Jin stated eloquently. We need to know perfectly well. Zijizibi by Zambadai. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Idiom, from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. Zhao Qian was amused. You are not the one going to the battlefield. What good is it to know so much? He continued, without waiting for Zhao Jin to reopen her mouth. Besides, it's all confidential and cannot be shared with you. He patted Zhao Jin's shoulder. Be obedient. Return and learn more needlework with Momo. Mother even stated yesterday that the mandarin ducks you embroidered resembled common ducks. How are you going to deal with it in the future? Put an end to your irascible temper. I still have work to do, so I won't chat with you. He didn't wait for Zhao Jin to inquire further before leaving. Zhao Jin glared huffily at Zhao Qian's back. She had no choice but to return to her courtyard. She overheard people discussing the border crisis the entire way. There was little question that the god of war, who had risen to such great heights and prospered for so long, had now been defeated. Even if it was for the best that he, as a deputy general, gave his life on the battlefield, her heart felt suffocated. When she returned to her room, she ordered all the maids to leave. Zhao Jin sat at the table, took a book on the art of war, and spread it out on the table, but she was not in the mood to read it. Her thoughts were consumed by the secret letter she had just discovered in her father's study. The border was in a state of emergency and the battle was on the horizon. The former god of war was defeated and despised by all, and they accused him of being a traitor. Zhao Jin recalled the valiant and learned deputy general she had met at the palace banquet. Her benefactor was imprisoned before she could repay the kindness that had saved her life. A drop of kindness, as the saying goes, must be repaid by a spring. Furthermore, the daughter of a general's family must value gratitude and not be afraid or cowardly. Furthermore, if she stayed in the Fu, mother would spend the entire day looking for a suitable match for her. Zhao Jin stroked the Art of War book in front of her and made a decision in her heart. She had no idea how her life would change as a result of her decision. At this point, courage was priceless. In the world, there were both gains and losses. To obtain something, one must first lose something. The great wheel of fate turned and roared. Zhao Jin spread a cloth bag across the table and placed the book in it. At Jinying Wangfu, the account book in Steward Lin's hands was almost crumpled by him, as he continued to peer inside the room. Don't bother looking. Jean C sat down and made herself a cup of tea. Master is currently in a bad mood. If you continue to poke around, you may encounter bad luck. What do you know, little girl? Steward Lin shook his head. Wang Ye is an impetuous young man. This time he was turned down by a woman. He feels more humiliated than sad. Now he must be trying to figure out how to remedy it. Jean C followed Steward Lin's gaze, but she couldn't detect any humiliation from the cold and calm man inside the room, so she shrugged her shoulders. That Hong and Junju has some skills. I can't believe there's still a woman in Great Jean who could reject Wang Ye. Steward Lin spoke with a look of disbelief on his face. But there's something wrong. Young Foreign was clearly vivacious and bold the last time in the Wangfu. Why did she withdraw when a joyous occasion was right in front of her eyes? Is this just a ruse? Women, after all, love to be sweet-talked. It must be Wang Ye who was unable to coax and scared her away. Jean C was speechless. She looked up at the sky as if she hadn't heard Steward Lin's nagging words. It's just that Steward Lin couldn't seem to keep his mouth shut. He sighed, stroking his beard. Wang Ye excels at everything but has a bad temper. When old master was alive, he was similar to young master today. He was as beautiful as a jade tree in the wind, with a natural and unrestrained demeanor, free-spirited and uninhibited by nature, and incomparably elegant. Old master's reputation spread throughout the great Jino, even to other kingdoms at the time. Everyone praised him as a handsome man. However, old master's temperament was much more lively than young master's, especially when it came to women, as he was a man with many admirers but was still unattached. Many girls wanted to throw themselves into the lake when he married Furen. Steward Lin wondered aloud. How did young master become so ascetic? He really makes me so afraid. Wan Huatsong Zhongguo Pinya Bujan Shun. Passing a myriad of flowers but not one of the leaves stuck on one's body. It means a flirtatious man who loves many but none of the women can get him attached. Adonwan. Bujin Nusa. Based on Buddhist teaching, it should mean sexually abstinent, but I'll put it here as ascetic. What are you so afraid of? Being scared isn't going to help you. Jean C finally couldn't help but make a remark. Don't overthink things, Lao Lin. Now that master is in a terrible mood, try to stay away from him as much as possible to prevent getting burned. Of course I can help. Steward Lin boldly raised his not-so-sturdy physique and firmly stated, I'm not trying to brag. Although I was not as handsome and elegant as old master when I was younger, I was still considered an attractive young master. Many young ladies from prominent families fell in love with me at the time, but I didn't ordinarily care for women. Even till now, I haven't met a suitable person who can communicate with me. Oh, how time flies. Jean C made a face as if she were about to vomit. She cast a brief glance at Steward Lin's wrinkled old face and then averted her gaze silently. What's that look on your face? Steward Lin protested, feeling that his pride had been severely affronted. The outside noise never reached Xiao Xiao's ears. He lowered his gaze to the tea in his hand, his long lashes drooping gently and his posture was calm, but the several shadow guards hidden in the shadows did not dare to make a sound. Despite the fact that he was as relaxed and elegant as before, his entire body exuded a chill that said, I am in a foul mood today, so everyone must disperse. Master Xiao, the handsome man Xiao, was clearly angry and perhaps a little depressed. Within a quarter of an hour, news of Xiao Xiao's marriage proposal being rejected by Zhang Ruan had spread all across the genie guard. The genie guard took up the cudgels on behalf of Xiao Xiao. Hong and Junju turned her nose up at their master despite his talent and good looks. She lacked vision. Dabobuping. To come to the aid of somebody suffering an injustice / to fight for justice. That said, while Xiao Xiao was upset, he had no desire to seek his own death as a result of this. Despite the fact that he had been jilted and thus appeared pitiful in Genie Guard's eyes, Xiao Xiao was currently focused on one thing. He dispatched the secret guards to investigate, but the results were the same. It's just that Zhang Ruan's words were still ringing in his ears, filled with hateful vows, ironic smiles, deeply hidden secrets and hatred. But nothing was found, as if a hand had erased all traces of Zhang Ruan's past. Moreover, from what he had discovered, Zhang Ruan's past was so simple that it seemed as if those traces existed in another world. There had never been love or hate in the world that appeared without rhyme or reason. Yibao Pavilion had a wealth of information, but they couldn't uncover Zhang Ruan's secret. Xiao Xiao furrowed his brow slightly. Meanwhile, several genie guards thought that Xiao Xiao was still depressed over her rejection, and so Jean Eyre finally mustered up some courage and leapt down from the beam. Master Young Foreign may be scared. There's no reason to be so downcast. Just make a few more proposals. As we subordinates have observed, Young Foreign has a different attitude toward you. As the proverb goes, a true man should not fear failure, so you should try more. It's nothing. Xiao Xiao examined his sleeves. The gold thread embroidered on the cloud pattern brocade clothes was hidden in the dark and cold fabric, revealing a faint luster. I don't need her consent. I'll simply have a marriage conferred. Oh. Steward Lin, who was eavesdropping through the crack in the door, burst into tears. Young master finally possessed a shred of old master's charm during those years. A man should have this kind of strength. It moved him tremendously. The sandalwood incense spiraled up in Xianing Palace, filling the hall with a peaceful scent that could not help but calm any frustrated soul. Empress Dowager Ida sat on a red satin soft cushion. Her posture was languid, but her eyes were as sharp as a knife. With a thoughtful expression, she stared at the sweet-tempered and gentle girl. Yang Gugu stood quietly to the side. The atmosphere in the hall was strange. Hongin, Ija is asking your opinion. Are you willing or not? Just now, she had made her intentions abundantly clear. That is, bestowing Zhang Ruan as the principal consort to Jinying Wang. Because of Zhang Ruan's background, it could be considered social climbing. Xiao Xiao not only wielded enormous military power, but was also trusted by the emperor. He was nobler than several royal princes. In addition to his unusual good looks, he had impeccable manners. His literary and military strategies were both superb. He was regarded as a revered leader, with people naturally gravitating toward him. Although Zhang Ruan was now given the title Junju, this was just an empty title. The Zhang family was now in decline, whereas the Zhao family was not of the same clan. Zongxing Pinjiu. Lit. All the stars cup themselves around the moon. Figure to view somebody as a core figure / to group around a revered leader / to revolve around somebody. Zhang Ruan cast a glance at Empress Dowager Ida. Empress Dowager Ida appeared as serene as before, but her eyes were fierce. The tone, albeit consultative, left her with no choice after all. Silence filled her heart as her eyes drooped. Xiao Xiao's coercive method caught her off guard and she was unsure how to respond. But there was no sense of anger. Zhang Ruan knew that marrying into Jining Wangfu at this point was the best option because, by comparison, Jining Wangfu could provide her with more protection than other places. Finally, she responded with a slight smile. Hongyan would never dare to aspire to such a position. I'm relying on Imperial Grandmother to make the decision. But I'm afraid that setting the betrothal now will cause trouble for Jining Wangfu. Yang Gugu exhaled a sigh of relief and Empress Dowager Ida gave Zhang Ruan a satisfied glance. You don't have to worry about that. She would not bring up the marriage if Zhang Ruan showed even the slightest hint of displeasure. Xiao Xiao's opinion was valuable, but if the marriage was not a good match, she would not act as a matchmaker arbitrarily. She had also lived through her maiden years and knew that Zhang Ruan's feelings were not completely unaffected by him. Furthermore, just now Zhang Ruan had considered Jining Wangfu's well-being even before marriage, which made her feel relieved. Zhang Ruan noticed Empress Dowager Ida's expression and then looked at her sleeve. She was certain that what she had just said was the correct response. Empress Dowager Ida considered this for a few moments. As a matter of fact, this is a matter concerning both of you children. Aijia knows you're good since you've been at Aijia's side. I'll give a reply to beloved Minister Xiao as well as send him some things. Hongyan, please pay a visit to Jining Wangfu on Aijia's behalf. Zhang Ruan was taken aback for a moment before replying with a smile. Yes? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.